Welcome to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, where tonight we'll journey through magical corridors, enchanted classrooms, and the peaceful grounds of the castle. Join us as we explore the wizarding world in a story designed to help you drift into a peaceful sleep. After our story concludes, you'll hear the gentle crackling of a common room fire to help you fall asleep. There will be no advertisements or interruptions, just the continuous, soothing sounds of flames to carry you into your dreams. Now take a deep breath, relax your mind, and let's begin our magical adventure. The Great Hall of Hogwarts had long since emptied, the enchanted ceiling now reflecting a deep indigo sky dotted with twinkling stars. While the castle's human inhabitants drifted into dreams in their four-poster beds, another kind of magic was just beginning. This was the time when the castle's smallest caretakers emerged from their hidden corners to tend the ancient stones and flickering flames that kept Hogwarts feeling like home. Their tiny bare feet padded across worn flagstones, making less noise than falling dust as they worked with a quiet dignity most witches and wizards would never witness. Among them was Twinkle, a young house elf with large amber eyes that seemed perpetually wide with wonder. Unlike some of her older counterparts who had grown accustomed to the marvels of Hogwarts, Twinkle still found herself pausing mid-chore to gaze at the way moonlight filtered through the stained glass windows, or how the portraits would mumble sleepy nothings when she dusted their frames. Tonight was no different. As she climbed the spiral staircase to Gryffindor Tower, a small wicker basket of cleaning supplies balanced against her hip. The common room welcomed her with dying embers in the fireplace, casting a soft orange glow across the squashy armchairs and threadbare rugs that had witnessed countless late-night study sessions and whispered conspiracies. Twinkle set down her basket and reached for her feather duster, her long fingers wrapping around its worn wooden handle with practiced ease. She began with the bookshelves, working methodically from left to right, top to bottom, her large ears twitching occasionally at the sound of a distant owl or the gentle creak of the castle settling. It was behind the third armchair, the one with the slightly frayed tassels that always seemed to be a favorite among the students, that Twinkle found it. A sock. Not just any sock, but a curious one indeed, knitted with thick, uneven stitches in a pattern of orange and purple zigzags that seemed to swim before her eyes in the dim light. One side was stretched, where a thumb had clearly been pushed through, creating a small hole that someone had attempted to mend with bright blue thread. Twinkle froze, her dust cloth suspended in mid-air. A sock. A single, lonely sock. In the wizarding world, such an item carried immense significance to a house elf. It was a symbol of freedom, of choice, of a life beyond service. But this particular sock lay crumpled and forgotten, as if carelessly dropped rather than deliberately presented. Twinkle's heart fluttered in her narrow chest like a captured snitch. "Is it meant for Twinkle?" she whispered to the empty room, her voice so soft it barely disturbed the air. "Or is it just... The sock offered no answers as she gingerly picked it up between two fingers. It wasn't particularly clean, there was a smudge that might have been chocolate on the heel, and the toe carried the unmistakable scent of someone who had worn it for perhaps a day too long. Yet, Twinkle treated it with the reverence one might show a precious artifact. She glanced around the common room, half expecting a student to emerge from the shadows, laughing at her assumption. But the tower remained silent, save for the occasional pop from the dying fire. The portraits along the wall were all sleeping, their gentle snores creating a soothing backdrop to her dilemma. Twinkle must think on this, she decided, carefully folding the sock and placing it in the pocket of her tea towel dress. The rest of her cleaning duties that night were performed with unusual haste. She dusted tables with quick, efficient strokes, plumped cushions with determined pats, and arranged books with barely a glance at their spines. All the while, the sock seemed to pulse against her side like a second heartbeat, demanding her attention. When her chores were complete, instead of returning to the kitchens where the other house elves would be gathering for a brief rest before breakfast preparations, Twinkle found herself drawn upward. Her feet carried her up staircases and through corridors until she reached the door to the astronomy tower, the highest point in Hogwarts and the perfect place to think. The night air greeted her with a gentle caress as she stepped onto the observation platform. It was cooler here and fresher, carrying the scent of the pine forests that surrounded the castle grounds. Far below, the black lake reflected the moonlight like a massive mirror laid upon the earth, its surface occasionally rippled by the tentacles of the giant squid, enjoying a leisurely midnight swim. Twinkle approached the stone balustrade and stood on tiptoe to peer over it, her chin just clearing the ancient stonework. The sky stretched above her, vast and infinite, a tapestry of stars so bright and clear they seemed close enough to touch. It was a view that few house elves ever took the time to appreciate, but Twinkle had discovered this sanctuary weeks ago and found herself returning whenever her thoughts became too tangled to unravel on her own. She withdrew the sock from her pocket and held it up to the starlight, as if the celestial bodies might illuminate some hidden truth within its fibers. "What does Twinkle do with you?" she asked the sock. "Are you a gift, or just forgotten?" The breeze rippled through the fabric, making it dance slightly in her grip. Twinkle couldn't help but giggle at the sight, the sound like tiny silver bells in the quiet night. "Twinkle thinks you are a funny sock," she confided, turning it over to examine the mismatched stitches. "Not a perfect sock, but maybe a special sock." She tucked her spindly legs beneath her and settled against the cool stone of the tower floor, the sock now resting in her lap. Above her, the stars continued their silent vigil, generations of astronomical patterns that had been studied by countless students from this very spot. "Stars know many things," Twinkle mused. "Stars have seen many socks and many elves and many choices." She tilted her head back, her enormous eyes reflecting the pinpricks of light. "Perhaps stars will tell Twinkle what to do." As if in response, a gentle breeze swept across the tower, ruffling Twinkle's bat-like ears and carrying with it the distant hoot of an owl returning to the owlery. The house elf closed her eyes, focusing on the sensations around her. The cool stone beneath her, the whispering wind in her ears, the weight of the sock in her small hands. "If sock is meant for Twinkle," she whispered, her words carried upward on her breath, "then show Twinkle a sign." The night remained peaceful, offering neither confirmation nor denial of her request. Twinkle wasn't sure what sort of sign she expected. Perhaps a sudden gust of wind to snatch the sock away, or a portrait to wake up and offer sage advice. But the universe seemed content to let her sit with her questions, surrounded by the gentle presence of the nighttime world. Time passed, measured by the slow drift of clouds across the moon and the gradual shift of shadows on the tower floor. Twinkle found herself humming a soft melody, an old elvish lullaby that her mother had sung to her when she was just an elfling. It spoke of service and purpose, of the quiet dignity found in caring for others. But it also hinted at something else, a longing that lived in the spaces between the notes, a yearning for something unnamed. "Twinkle is happy at Hogwarts," she told the sock, as if it had questioned her contentment. Twinkle has warm place to sleep and good work to do. She smoothed a wrinkle from the sock's fabric. But sometimes Twinkle wonders, what else? The question hung in the air, both frightening and exhilarating. For a house elf to wonder about what else was uncommon, perhaps even dangerous. They were creatures of tradition and routine, finding fulfillment in the perfect execution of their duties. And yet here she sat, considering possibilities beyond her prescribed existence, all because of a discarded sock with a hole in its toe. A movement caught her eye, a streak of light across the sky, quick and bright before fading away. A shooting star, Twinkle gasped, her free hand flying to her mouth. She had seen them before from the tower windows while cleaning, but never like this, with the entire sky spread before her like an open book. "A sign?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Before she could second-guess herself, Twinkle closed her eyes tight and did something she'd seen students do many times. She made a wish on the fallen star. It wasn't a wish for freedom or adventure or any of the grand things that wizards might desire. It was smaller, gentler, but no less significant. Twinkle wishes to know her own heart, she whispered to the night, to know what makes it sing. When she opened her eyes, the sock in her hands seemed unchanged. It was still just fabric and thread, still bearing the smudge of chocolate and the scent of its former owner. And yet, something felt different. Not in the sock, but in Twinkle herself. A tiny seed of something new had been planted in her heart, watered by starlight and the simple act of asking questions that had no easy answers. She didn't have to decide about the sock tonight, she realized. Perhaps she didn't need to decide at all. Maybe the value of the sock wasn't in what it symbolized in wizard terms, but in how it had led her here to this moment of quiet reflection beneath the stars. Carefully, Twinkle folded the sock and returned it to her pocket. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, almost imperceptibly, the deepest blue gradually softening toward dawn. Soon, the castle would stir to life, and her duties would begin anew. But for now, in these precious moments between night and day, Twinkle allowed herself to simply be, not just a house elf, not just a caretaker of Hogwarts, but a being with thoughts and questions and the courage to ask them. She sat in stillness, breathing in the cool pre-dawn air, letting it fill her lungs and clear her mind. The shooting star had long since faded, its brief journey across the heavens complete, but its impact lingered in the quiet smile that played across Twinkle's face, and the gentle way she patted the pocket where the sock now rested. Whatever tomorrow might bring, whatever choice she might eventually make, tonight had given her something precious, a moment of connection with the vast universe and the tiny stirring of possibility within her own heart. And for now, that was enough. As the first golden rays of sunlight began to peek over the distant mountains, Twinkle rose to her feet. With one last look at the star-strewn sky, now fading into morning blue, she made her way back down the spiral staircase, her bare feet padding softly against the stone steps. The castle was still slumbering, but soon it would awaken to a new day of lessons and laughter, of spells and secrets, and Twinkle would be there, dusting and polishing, cooking and cleaning, her presence largely unseen, but essential to the magic that was Hogwarts. But perhaps, when her chores were done and the castle grew quiet once more, she would return to the astronomy tower. Perhaps she would bring the sock and hold it up to the starlight again, continuing a conversation that had only just begun, a dialogue between a house elf, a lost sock, and the infinite sky. For now, though, there were breakfast tables to set and fires to kindle. Twinkle quickened her pace as she descended toward the kitchens, where the delicious aroma of baking bread was already beginning to permeate the air. Her fellow house elves would be bustling about, their collective magic ensuring that when the students and professors arrived in the great hall, everything would be perfect. She slipped into the organized chaos of the kitchen, immediately reaching for an apron that hung on a hook precisely at her height. No one questioned where she had been or why she was slightly later than usual. House elves respected each other's routines and responsibilities, trusting that each would fulfill their duties in their own way. As Twinkle helped prepare trays of kippers and baskets of toast, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency, she found herself humming again. It was the same elvish lullaby from earlier, but somehow it sounded different now. Lighter, more hopeful. The notes danced through the steam rising from porridge pots and curled around the crates of fresh pumpkin juice being uncorked for the morning meal. A few of the older elves glanced her way, their expressions curious but not disapproving. There was something different about Twinkle this morning, a subtle change that was difficult to name but impossible to miss. She moved with the same careful precision as always, but there was a new lightness to her step, as if she were dancing to music that only she could hear. And in her pocket, carefully folded and hidden from view, was a mismatched sock with a hole in its toe. A small, ordinary object that had become something extraordinary simply because Twinkle had paused long enough to wonder about it. It wasn't a symbol of freedom or servitude, of choice or obligation. It was a reminder that sometimes the most magical moments happen not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, in questions asked beneath a canopy of stars. As the first bell rang, signaling the imminent arrival of hungry students, Twinkle took her place among the line of elves, ready to send the breakfast feast up to the great hall with a snap of their fingers. But even as she focused on her task, a tiny corner of her mind remained in the astronomy tower, bathed in starlight and possibility. And somewhere in the vastness of the universe, a shooting star's journey continued, carrying with it the wish of a house elf who had dared to ask what made her heart sing. The days that followed seemed to flow with a new rhythm for Twinkle. Her duties remained the same, the endless cycle of cleaning and cooking, mending and tending that kept Hogwarts functioning smoothly. But she approached them with a fresh perspective. Each task became an opportunity for mindfulness, for noticing the small details that made Hogwarts not just a school of witchcraft and wizardry, but a living, breathing entity with secrets and stories woven into its very stones. The mysterious sock remained in her possession, carefully stored in a small wooden box beneath her sleeping mat in the elves' quarters. Each night, after her fellow elves had drifted off to sleep, their soft snores creating a gentle symphony in the darkness, Twinkle would remove the sock from its hiding place and examine it by wand light. Sometimes she would trace the zigzag pattern with her finger, following the uneven stitches and wondering about the hands that had created it. Was it knitted by a loving grandmother, a friend learning the craft for the first time? Or perhaps by magic, needles clicking away on their own while their owner focused on other matters. Other times, she would hold it up to her nose, inhaling deeply to catch the lingering scents that told the sock's story. A mixture of chocolate and grass stains, laundry soap and the unmistakable essence of its former owner. With each examination, Twinkle felt she was getting to know not just the sock, but the person who had worn it, carried it, and ultimately left it behind. One particularly quiet evening, as Twinkle was dusting the trophy room, carefully wiping away fingerprints from the gleaming silver cups and shields that recorded generations of Hogwarts achievements, she found herself wondering about legacy. These trophies represented moments of triumph, preserved for posterity, their significance outlasting the students who had earned them. What legacy did house elves leave behind? Their magic was woven into the very fabric of wizarding society, yet their names rarely appeared in history books or on plaques. Their greatest achievements, perfectly prepared feasts, immaculately maintained common rooms, clothes mended so skillfully that the repairs were invisible, were ephemeral, enjoyed but rarely acknowledged. As she polished a particularly ornate Quidditch cup, her reflection distorted in its curved surface, Twinkle was surprised to find that this thought didn't sadden her as it might have before. Instead, it filled her with a curious sense of peace. Perhaps there was a quiet dignity in creating beauty that existed in the moment, in contributing to an environment where others could thrive, even if they never knew your name. Twinkle is part of Hogwarts, she whispered to herself, her breath fogging the silver surface briefly before she wiped it away. And Hogwarts remembers, even if wizards forget. The trophy room felt different after that realization, less a monument to wizard accomplishments and more a shared space, where elf magic and wizard achievement coexisted, each enhancing the other in a delicate dance that had continued for centuries. That night, Twinkle returned to the astronomy tower, the sock tucked safely in her pocket. The sky was partly cloudy, with gaps between the silvery masses revealing patches of star-studded darkness. She settled into her usual spot, legs crossed beneath her tea towel dress, and tilted her face upward, letting the cool night air caress her skin. Twinkle has been thinking, she told the sock as she withdrew it from her pocket, about choices and about purpose. She smoothed the fabric across her knee, noticing how the purple and orange patterns seemed to shift and change in the moonlight that filtered through the breaking clouds. Twinkle wonders if choosing to serve is different from serving without choice. She pondered this for a moment, her large eyes reflecting the distant stars. If Twinkle chooses to care for Hogwarts because Twinkle loves Hogwarts, is that freedom in its own way? The sock, as always, offered no answers. But Twinkle found that articulating her thoughts aloud helped clarify them in her own mind. She continued her one-sided conversation, unaware that she was no longer alone in her nighttime sanctuary. Sometimes, Twinkle thinks freedom isn't about where you are or what you do, she mused, but about why you do it and how it makes your heart feel. A most insightful observation, came a gentle voice from the doorway. Twinkle leapt to her feet, the sock clutched protectively against her chest. Standing in the arched entrance to the tower platform was Professor Dumbledore, his silver beard gleaming in the moonlight and his half-moon spectacles perched upon his crooked nose. "Professor Dumbledore, sir," Twinkle squeaked, instantly dropping into a low bow. Twinkle did not know. Twinkle should not be. Twinkle is sorry for disturbing. Dumbledore raised a hand, halting her stream of apologies. "Please, do not trouble yourself. The astronomy tower belongs to all who seek its wisdom." His blue eyes twinkled as he gestured to the space beside her. "May I join you in your stargazing?" Twinkle nodded mutely, too surprised to form words. The headmaster of Hogwarts lowered himself to sit cross-legged beside her, arranging his magnificent purple robes around him with the ease of someone well accustomed to finding comfort in unusual places. I often find myself drawn here on nights when sleep proves elusive, Dumbledore confided, gazing upward at the partly clouded sky. There is something particularly grounding about placing oneself beneath the vast canopy of stars. Our troubles seem smaller when viewed against the backdrop of infinity, do they not? Twinkle followed his gaze upward, nodding slowly. Yes, Professor Dumbledore, sir. Stars make Twinkle's questions feel Questions are valuable companions, Twinkle, Dumbledore said, his voice soft but clear in the night air. They lead us to greater understanding, both of the world around us and of ourselves. He glanced at the sock still clutched in her small hands, and sometimes they arise from the most unexpected sources. Twinkle looked down at the sock, suddenly aware of how tightly she was gripping it. Slowly, she loosened her hold, allowing the fabric to rest more naturally in her palms. Twinkle found this sock, sir, she explained hesitantly. In Gryffindor Tower. Twinkle is unsure what to do with it. Dumbledore's eyes softened with understanding. Ah, the symbolic weight of a simple garment. How curious that something designed merely to warm one's feet can carry such profound meaning. He didn't reach for the sock or suggest she discard it. Instead, he simply gazed at it thoughtfully, as if it were a complex magical artifact worthy of careful consideration. What do you wish to do with it, Twinkle? He asked finally, his question gentle but direct. Twinkle blinked, startled by the question. House elves were rarely asked about their wishes. They were given orders, instructions, tasks to complete, not choices to make. Twinkle doesn't know, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Twinkle likes Hogwarts. Twinkle is proud to serve. But she trailed off, struggling to articulate the complex emotions swirling within her. But you wonder if there might be other ways to live. Dumbledore completed her thought not unkindly. Other paths to explore, other forms of happiness to discover. Twinkle nodded, relief washing over her at being understood so completely. A perfectly natural curiosity, Dumbledore assured her. One that, I dare say, has occurred to many house elves throughout history, though few have had the opportunity, or perhaps the courage, to express it. He gestured toward the vast expanse of sky above them. The stars teach us that multiple truths can exist simultaneously. They are massive burning spheres of gas, as our astronomy professors would tell you. They are navigational guides for those lost at sea. They are ancient deities and heroes memorialized in constellations. They are wishes waiting to be made. His eyes twinkled. All of these truths coexist, each valid in its own context. Twinkle considered this, her brow furrowed in concentration. So, Twinkle can be house elf who serves Hogwarts, and also Twinkle who asks questions and looks at stars? Precisely, Dumbledore nodded, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Your dedication to Hogwarts and your personal journey of self-discovery need not be in conflict. They are complementary aspects of who you are. He reached into his robe and withdrew a small purple pouch, from which he extracted what appeared to be a lemon drop. Would you care for a sweet? I find they enhance contemplation marvelously. Twinkle accepted the candy with a murmured thank you, placing it carefully on her tongue. The tartness made her eyes water slightly, but the underlying sweetness was pleasant, much like the conversation itself, challenging but ultimately rewarding. That in companionable silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts as the clouds continued their slow dance across the night sky, alternately revealing and concealing the stars. The castle below them creaked and settled, the living stone adjusting itself, as it had done for centuries. "Professor Dumbledore, sir?" Twinkle finally broke the silence, her voice tentative. "Yes, Twinkle. Does Professor Dumbledore ever not know what to do?" Dumbledore's chuckle was warm and genuine. "My dear Twinkle, more often than you might imagine. The privilege of age is not certainty, but rather becoming comfortable with uncertainty." He adjusted his spectacles thoughtfully. "The most important decisions rarely present themselves with obvious answers. If they did, they would hardly be worth making, would they?" Twinkle considered this, turning the sock over in her hands. "So, it is okay that Twinkle doesn't know yet about the sock?" "More than okay," Dumbledore assured her. "It is perfect. Some decisions benefit from the gentle marination of time and thought." He rose to his feet with surprising grace for a wizard of his years. "And now, I believe I shall attempt sleep once more. These old bones require their rest, even if this restless mind sometimes resists it." He moved toward the doorway but paused before descending the staircase. "Twinkle, might I offer one final thought?" Twinkle nodded eagerly, hanging on his every word. Freedom, in its truest sense, begins not with a piece of clothing or a dramatic declaration, but with the simple act of asking questions, particularly of oneself. His blue eyes held hers with gentle intensity. "You have already begun that journey, sock or no sock. And that, I think, is something to be celebrated." With a small nod that somehow conveyed both respect and encouragement, Dumbledore disappeared down the spiral staircase, the soft swish of his robes fading into silence. Twinkle remained on the tower, the forgotten sock now resting loosely in her lap. Dumbledore's words echoed in her mind, weaving themselves into the tapestry of her thoughts like golden threads through ordinary fabric. Sky above her had cleared somewhat, revealing a broader expanse of stars than had been visible earlier. Among them, Twinkle spotted a particularly bright one that seemed to pulse with a gentle, steady light. "Twinkle will keep asking questions," she promised the distant star, "and Twinkle will listen for answers, even when they are difficult." She tucked the sock back into her pocket and stood, brushing dust from her tea towel dress. The eastern horizon showed no hint of dawn yet, but Twinkle knew that morning would arrive eventually, as it always did, bringing with it a new day of duties and discoveries. As she made her way down the spiral staircase, her bare feet silent against the stone steps, Twinkle felt a sense of peace settling over her. She didn't have all the answers. Perhaps she never would. But she had something equally valuable, the permission to seek them at her own pace, in her own way. The sock was neither a burden nor a solution. It was simply a catalyst, a small object that had opened a door to larger questions. And for that, Twinkle was grateful. Back in the kitchens, the night's baking was already underway, with the earliest rising elves preparing dough for the day's bread. Twinkle slipped in among them, taking her place at a flour-dusted table and beginning to knead with practiced hands. The rhythmic motion was soothing, grounding her in the present moment after the ethereal quality of her tower conversation. As her fingers worked the dough, pressing and folding, Twinkle found herself smiling. There was satisfaction in this work, in creating something that would nourish and delight others. It was a different kind of magic than wand-waving or potion brewing, but magic nonetheless. The everyday enchantment of care and attention to detail. Perhaps, she thought as she shaped the dough into perfect rounds, this was part of what made her heart sing. Not just the act of service itself, but the devotion behind it, the intention to create moments of comfort and contentment for those who would never know her name. And if that was true, then choosing to continue this work freely, thoughtfully, with full awareness of its value, might be the most profound expression of freedom she could imagine. The dough beneath her fingers seemed to respond to these thoughts, becoming more pliant and elastic, as if sensing the change in the hands that shaped it. Twinkle's smile widened as she reached for the next portion, ready to transform it from simple ingredients into something that would bring joy to others when they gathered for breakfast in a few short hours. In her pocket, the sock rested against her side, no longer a symbol of indecision, but a reminder of possibility, of stars and wishes, of questions asked and yet to be answered, and of the quiet, transformative power of choosing one's own path, even when that path led right back to where you started, but with new eyes to see it. As morning light began to filter through the high windows of the kitchen, turning the floating dust motes into tiny golden stars, Twinkle hummed her elvish lullaby, its melody now infused with the wisdom of the night, a wisdom she would carry with her like the sock in her pocket through all the days to come. In the weeks that followed her midnight conversation with Dumbledore, Twinkle noticed subtle changes in her perception of Hogwarts. Corridors she had traversed thousands of times revealed new details, a carved initial hidden in a banister, a portrait whose subject changed expression only when observed from a specific angle, a window that captured the sunset in a particularly breathtaking way. The castle, already magical by any standard, seemed to unfold before her like a living book, each day offering new passages to discover and interpret. Twinkle found herself lingering over her chores, not from laziness, but from a deepened appreciation for the spaces she maintained and the history embedded within them. Her fellow house elves noticed the change in her, though they struggled to define it. Where once Twinkle had moved through her duties with efficient purpose, she now approached them with a kind of mindful reverence, as if each act of service was a meditation in itself. Her work remained impeccable, perhaps even improved by her newfound attention to detail, but there was an undefinable quality to her presence that set her slightly apart. "Twinkle seems different," remarked Pipsy, an older female elf with grey-tinged ears, as they polished silverware together one afternoon. "Not bad different, just different." Twinkle looked up from the soup ladle she was buffing to a mirror shine. "Different how, Pipsy?" The older elf tilted her head, considering. "Like Twinkle is seeing things others don't see. Like Twinkle has secret." There was no accusation in Pipsy's tone, merely curiosity, but Twinkle felt her cheeks warm slightly. The sock remained her private talisman, stored in its box beneath her sleeping mat, taken out only during her solitary visits to the astronomy tower. She hadn't shared its existence with the other elves, unsure how they would react to what might be perceived as disloyalty to their collective purpose. "Twinkle just notices things," she replied carefully. "Beautiful things about Hogwarts. Twinkle is lucky to be here." Pipsy nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. "Hogwarts is good place, plenty of work, plenty of magic. Elves are respected here." She resumed her polishing with renewed vigor, "not like other places. Pipsy has heard stories." She trailed off, shaking her head as if to dispel unpleasant memories. Twinkle looked at her with new interest, realizing that Pipsy, like all the house elves, had a history and experiences that preceded her time at Hogwarts. How many stories remained untold, tucked away behind the collective facade of unwavering servitude? "What stories, Pipsy?" Twinkle asked gently. "If Pipsy wants to tell." The older elf's hands stilled on the silver fork she was polishing. For a moment, Twinkle thought she wouldn't answer, that the question had crossed some invisible boundary of propriety among their kind. But then Pipsy sighed, a soft exhale that seemed to carry the weight of years. Pipsy was not always at Hogwarts, she began, her voice low enough that only Twinkle could hear. Pipsy served Wizard Family before. Wizard Family was not kind. She didn't elaborate further, but she didn't need to. The slight droop of her ears and the shadow that passed across her face told enough of the story. Twinkle felt a surge of empathy for her fellow elf, along with a renewed appreciation for the relative safety and dignity they were afforded at Hogwarts. Pipsy is glad to be here now, the older elf continued, her voice strengthening. Professor Dumbledore found Pipsy when Pipsy was in bad way, brought Pipsy to Hogwarts, gave Pipsy purpose again. Twinkle reached out impulsively, her small hand covering Pipsy's gnarled one. Hogwarts is lucky to have Pipsy, she said firmly. The older elf looked startled by the touch, but after a moment her wizened face relaxed into a small smile. And Hogwarts is lucky to have Twinkle, who sees beautiful things. They resumed their polishing in companionable silence, the silver gleaming as it caught and reflected the afternoon sunlight streaming through the high kitchen windows. But something had shifted between them. A connection formed through the simple act of sharing, not just word, but words and understanding. That evening, as Twinkle made her way through her cleaning assignments in the library, she found herself paying closer attention to the house elves working alongside her. There was Dobby, his multiple layers of oddly matched clothing marking him as proudly, defiantly free, yet choosing to work at Hogwarts on his own terms. There was Ancient Gorple, whose arthritic fingers still managed to reshelve books with perfect precision, each tome finding its exact place among thousands. There was Winky, struggling with her newfound and unwanted freedom, finding solace in the structure of kitchen work even as she mourned her former position. Each elf had a story, Twinkle realized. Each had made choices, or had choices made for them, that led to this shared existence within Hogwarts walls. Yet within that shared purpose, there existed a spectrum of individual experiences and perspectives as varied as the stars in the night sky. This revelation accompanied Twinkle as she climbed the astronomy tower that night. The sock once again nestled in her pocket. The sky was exceptionally clear, a vast expanse of velvety darkness sprinkled with stars that seemed close enough to touch. Twinkle settled into her usual spot, drawing her knees to her chest and tilting her face upward to absorb the celestial display. Twinkle has been thinking about stories, she told the sock as she withdrew it from her pocket, about how every elf has one, just like every star has one. She traced the zigzag pattern on the sock, noticing how a loose thread had begun to unravel slightly at the toe. With careful fingers, she tucked it back, smoothing the fabric with gentle strokes. Twinkle wonders about sock story too. Who made you? Who wore you? Why were you left behind? She held it up to the starlight, examining it from different angles. And what should your story be with Twinkle? The questions hung in the night air, unanswered but not forgotten. Twinkle was growing accustomed to living with uncertainty, finding a curious comfort in the space between knowing and not knowing. It was a liminal place, rich with possibility and free from the constraints of definitive choices. A sudden movement caught her eye. Another shooting star, its bright trail blazing across the sky before fading into the darkness. Twinkle gasped, reminded of the night weeks ago when a similar celestial visitor had prompted her first wish. "Hello again," she whispered to the vanished star. "Did you come to check on Twinkle's wish?" She closed her eyes, recalling the wish she had made that night, to know her own heart, to understand what made it sing. Had that wish been granted? Not in any dramatic fashion, perhaps, but in the subtle shifts of her daily experience, in her deepened appreciation for Hogwarts' beauty, in her growing curiosity about her fellow elves, in her conversations with the sock that had become a valued confidant. Opening her eyes, Twinkle gazed at the spot where the shooting star had disappeared. "Thank you," she said softly. "Twinkle's heart is learning its song." She remained on the tower for some time, content to simply exist in the moment, to feel the cool night air against her skin and to bask in the gentle light of distant stars. There was no urgency to decide about the sock, she realized. It would wait, as would all important choices, until the right moment presented itself. As the night deepened and the castle below settled into slumber, Twinkle found herself humming her elvish lullaby once again. But this time she did something she had never done before. She changed it. Where the original melody had dipped into a minor key, expressing the bittersweet nature of service, Twinkle's version lifted upward, transforming the phrase into something hopeful and affirming. It was a small change, almost imperceptible, yet it felt significant, a musical manifestation of her evolving perspective. She wasn't rejecting the traditional values embedded in the lullaby, she was simply reinterpreting them through the lens of her own experience. Finding harmony between duty and self-discovery, the modified melody echoed softly against the stone walls of the tower, drifting upward to mingle with the starlight. Twinkle sang it through once, twice, committing the new pattern to memory. It felt right, this gentle act of creation within the framework of tradition. It felt like freedom. With the new melody still humming in her heart, Twinkle descended from the tower and made her way back toward the kitchens. The corridors were quiet, the portraits snoozing in their frames, the suits of armor standing silent guard. Hogwarts at night was a different world, peaceful and mysterious. Its magic settled into the stones like a slumbering dragon. As she passed the entrance to Gryffindor Tower, Twinkle paused, remembering the spot where she had found the sock weeks ago. What had seemed like a moment of random chance now felt like something more significant, a catalyst for growth, a doorway to possibility. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty corridor, her words meant not for any specific entity, but for the complex tapestry of circumstances that had led her to this moment of gratitude. In the kitchens, the night's baking was already underway, filling the air with the comforting aroma of rising dough and warming ovens. Twinkle took her place among her fellow elves, her hands joining theirs in the ancient rhythms of food preparation that had sustained Hogwarts for generations. As she worked, she found herself humming her new version of the lullaby, the modified melody flowing naturally from her lips. Across the table, Pipsy looked up, her head tilted in curious recognition. "Boss the song," the older elf said, her hands continuing to shape pastry dough with practiced ease. "Pipsy knows it, but different?" Twinkle's hand stilled momentarily, a flicker of apprehension crossing her face. Had she overstepped by altering something so traditional? But Pipsy was smiling, her ancient eyes bright with interest. "Twinkle's way is nice. Happy. Pipsy likes." Relief and pleasure washed over Twinkle in equal measure. Twinkle just felt it differently, she explained, resuming her work. Pipsy nodded, understanding lighting her features. Songs change, elves change, all things change, like seasons. She shaped another perfect circle of dough, Change not bad thing. No, Twinkle agreed, a smile spreading across her face. Change not bad thing at all. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the kitchen bustling around them as other elves tended to ovens and mixed batters and arranged fruit for the morning's breakfast. The collective movements were like a well-choreographed dance, each participant knowing their role without needing direction. Yet, within that synchronized performance, Twinkle now recognized the individual flourishes and personal touches that made each elf's contribution unique. Gorple's perfectionist arranging of the silverware, Winky's extra dollop of cream in the porridge, Dobby's creative napkin folding that sometimes resembled magical creatures. Small acts of self-expression within the framework of service. And herself, Twinkle, with a modified lullaby on her lips and a special sock tucked safely away, finding her own balance between tradition and possibility, duty and discovery. As the first grey light of dawn began to filter through the high kitchen windows, Twinkle felt a sense of completion, as if some internal cycle had reached its natural conclusion. The sock would remain hers, not as a symbol of freedom in the traditional house elf sense, but as a reminder of the freedom she had already discovered within herself, the freedom to question, to wonder, to see beauty in small things, and to find her own melody within the greatest song of Hogwarts. It wasn't a dramatic conclusion, no grand gesture or life-altering decision, just a quiet certainty, settling into her heart like a seed finding fertile soil, ready to grow in its own time and in its own way. And for now, that was enough. More than enough. It was perfect. The sock and the starshine had given Twinkle something precious. The beginning of her own story. Written not in grand adventures or dramatic declarations, but in mindful moments and gentle questions, in connections formed and insights gained, in a lullaby rewritten and a heart that was learning, day by day, what made it truly sing. And as the morning light strengthened, painting the kitchen in warm golden hues, Twinkle continued her work, her small hands moving with practiced grace, her heart full with the knowledge that even the smallest beings can contain universes of wonder, and that sometimes the greatest magic happens not in the casting of spells, but in the simple act of asking, what if? Morning light filtered through the tall, arched windows of Gryffindor Tower, casting long golden rectangles across the worn floorboards of the boys' dormitory. Dust motes danced lazily in the beams, swirling in gentle eddies as sleepy students began to stir beneath heavy crimson quilts. It was that peculiar time of day when dreams still clung to the edges of consciousness, when the mind hovered in the delicious space between sleep and wakefulness. For most of the tower's inhabitants, it was a peaceful transition into a new day of magical learning. But not this morning, no. This particular dawn was about to announce itself in a most unusual way, with the theatrical lamentations of ordinary footwear. George Weasley had been up far later than the others, hunched over a worn leather-bound book in the common room long after his fellow Gryffindors had retired to their beds. His freckled face had been illuminated by wand light as he practiced the intricate wand movements illustrated on the yellowed pages before him. The spell had seemed simple enough, a charm to make clothing items offer cheerful compliments to their wearers, a bit of harmless fun, perfect for brightening a dreary Monday morning. What George hadn't accounted for was the interaction between his experimental charm and the residual magic from his previous prank. Enchanted ink that recited Shakespearean sonnets when exposed to candlelight. The two spells had mingled overnight, seeping through the laundry basket and infusing every sock within with an unexpected flair for the dramatic. And so, as the first rays of sunlight crept across the dormitory floor, a perfectly ordinary-looking maroon sock in Ron Weasley's hand cleared its non-existent throat and declared in a resonant baritone, "Alas, I find myself once again upon the left foot, when clearly my soul yearns for the right. Such is the tragedy of my existence, forever mismatched, forever misunderstood." Ron yelped, dropping the sock as if it had transformed into a live spider. The sock continued its soliloquy from the floor, unperturbed by its abrupt descent. Cast aside, rejected, the story of my life unfolds in wrinkles and neglect. O cruel hand that discards me so thoughtlessly. The commotion roused Neville Longbottom, who sat up groggily, his hair sticking up at odd angles. "Wasquinen?" he mumbled, fumbling for his slippers beneath the bed. As Neville's fingers made contact with his sensible blue socks, they too burst into theatrical monologue, one in a high reedy tenor and the other in a gravelly bass. "Together again, dear brother," the tenor sock exclaimed. "How I have longed for this reunion during our dark night in the drawer of despair." "Speak not to me of despair," rumbled the bass sock. "You know nothing of the depths I have seen, pressed as I was beneath the weight of winter boots and forgotten scarves." Across the room, Harry Potter was emerging from the depths of a particularly vivid dream about flying motorcycles. The voices pulled him reluctantly into wakefulness, his mind struggling to make sense of the peculiar dialogue floating around the dormitory. When he reached for his own socks, a matched pair of simple black ones, they immediately launched into a heated existential debate. "What is our purpose if not to warm the feet that wear us?" asked the first sock philosophically. "Purpose? You speak of purpose?" retorted its mate. "We are but temporary vessels, doomed to develop holes and be discarded. Our existence is fleeting, our destiny determined by the cruel whims of laundry day." By now, the entire dormitory was awake. Seamus Finnegan had barricaded himself in his bed hangings, refusing to touch any article of clothing. Dean Thomas was tentatively poking at his socks with his wand, trying to determine if they were possessed. And in the midst of it all stood Ron, his expression transitioning from shock to amusement as he watched Harry cautiously negotiate with his executively troubled footwear. "Bloody hell," Ron wheezed, laughter beginning to bubble up through his initial shock. "What's happened to our sock?" As if on cue, the door to the dormitory swung open to reveal Percy Weasley, already fully dressed in his perfectly pressed school robes, a gleaming prefect badge pinned to his chest. His expression of stern disapproval shifted to confusion as he took in the scene before him. "What," he demanded in his most authoritative prefect voice, "is going on in here?" His question was answered by a chorus of melodramatic socks, each competing to share its tale of woe more passionately than the last. "Behold the betrayal of the washing basin," cried one. "Never again shall I see my true match, lost in the mysterious realm beneath the bed," lamented another. "The indignity of being stretched upon feet that grow ever larger. My very fibers strain against this cruel expansion," declared a third. Percy's face flushed a shade of red that clashed spectacularly with his hair. This is, he spluttered, struggling to find words adequate to express his outrage. "This is incredibly unprofessional. Who is responsible for this disruption?" From his bed, Ron's laughter redoubled, tears now streaming down his freckled face. There was something inexplicably hilarious about Percy's indignation over unprofessional socks, especially as Percy himself was now gingerly lifting the hem of his robes to reveal that his own sensible grey socks had begun to recite what sounded suspiciously like a sock-muck soliloquy. To be worn, or not to be worn, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the holes and darns of outrageous fortune. "George!" Percy bellowed, his voice cracking slightly as his composure fractured. "Fred! I know you're behind this!" But the twins were nowhere to be seen, having wisely made an early departure for breakfast, leaving behind a dormitory in disarray and a collection of footwear with theatrical aspirations. Harry, who had finally managed to quiet his socks by stuffing them inside his trainers, where they continued to mutter darkly about the suffocating darkness of Leather Prison, exchanged an amused glance with Ron. Despite the chaos, there was something undeniably entertaining about the whole situation. Trust Fred and George to transform even the most mundane morning routine into an adventure. As the boys cautiously gathered their things for the day, trying to minimize contact with any potentially vocal garments, the dormitory door burst open once more. This time, it was Hermione Granger, her bushy hair even more voluminous than usual, as if charged with static electricity. "What on earth is happening in the girls' dormitory?" she demanded, her voice pitched higher than normal with exasperation. "All of our socks are... Oh." She paused, taking in the scene before her. "It's happening here too, then." In her hand, she clutched a pink sock that was in the middle of what appeared to be a passionate declaration of unrequited love. For a slipper it had briefly encountered in the laundry basket. Our brief touch was electric, transformative. Never have I known such completion as in that moment when our threads intertwine. "They won't stop," Hermione said, looking more intrigued than annoyed now that she realized the phenomenon wasn't limited to the girls' dormitory. "I've tried 3 different silencing charms. None of them worked." "It's George," Ron explained, having finally regained control of his laughter. "Has to be, though I don't think it turned out quite how he planned." "Well, it's certainly going to make for an interesting breakfast," Hermione observed, carefully setting down the lovelorn sock, which immediately began to compose a sonnet about the cruel separation from its beloved slipper. And indeed, breakfast that morning was unlike any Hogwarts had seen before. Students arrived in the Great Hall in various states of sock distress. Some had opted to go without, their bare ankles exposed to the morning chill. Others had cast muffling charms around their feet, creating the strange effect of moving through the hall in small bubbles of silence. A few brave souls, notably including Fred and George themselves, had embraced the chaos, enchanting their socks to project even more loudly, turning breakfast into an impromptu theatrical performance. At the staff table, the professors watched with expressions ranging from amusement to exasperation. Professor McGonagall's lips were pressed into a thin line, though a keen observer might have detected the slightest twitch at the corner of her mouth. Professor Flitwick was openly delighted, applauding particularly poetic sock declarations, and Professor Dumbledore, his eyes twinkling behind half-moon spectacles, leaned over to whisper something to McGonagall that made her reluctant smile briefly bloom before she composed herself once more. As plates of eggs and towers of toast appeared on the house tables, the great hall filled with the usual breakfast sounds, the clink of cutlery, the rustle of Daily Prophet pages, the murmur of conversation, all underscored by the ongoing dramatic monologues of hundreds of pairs of socks. George, enjoying a hearty serving of sausages at the Gryffindor table, caught Harry's eye and winked. "Not exactly what I'd planned," he admitted cheerfully, "but I'd call it an improvement, wouldn't you?" Before Harry could respond, A particularly loud sock nearby launched into a mournful dirge about its threadbare existence and the cruel cycle of wash, wear, and neglect, causing several nearby students to dissolve into fits of giggles. Yes, Harry thought as he reached for the marmalade, it was definitely an improvement on an ordinary Monday morning. The charm, as it turned out, was not easily reversed. Throughout the day, the sound of melodramatic socks provided an unusual soundtrack to lessons. In Transfiguration, Professor McGonagall deducted 5 points from Gryffindor when a particularly emotional sock interrupted her demonstration of turning teacups into tortoises with a heartfelt cry about the transformative power of true understanding. In Potions, Professor Snape was less amused, assigning detention to anyone whose footwear dared to utter a single syllable, resulting in a classroom of students sitting in rigid silence, desperately trying to control their increasingly rebellious socks. By dinner time, the charm had begun to fade, the sock soliloquies growing shorter and less frequent. A few stubborn pairs continued to offer occasional philosophical observations, but the peak of the dramatic performances had passed. Still, the incident had left its mark on the day, transforming an ordinary Monday into something unexpectedly memorable. As evening settled over the castle, the Gryffindor common room buzzed with animated discussions of the day's events. In a cozy corner by the fire, Harry, Ron, and Hermione had claimed 3 of the best armchairs, their schoolbooks spread out on a table before them in a half-hearted attempt at studying. "You have to admit," Ron said, stretching his sock-free feet toward the hearth, "it was pretty brilliant. Mental, but brilliant." "It was certainly advanced charm work," Hermione acknowledged, her academic interest evidently overcoming her initial irritation, combining an animation charm with voice projection and what must have been some kind of awareness enchantment. "I'd be interested to know what text George was working from." "You could ask him," Harry suggested, nodding toward the corner, where Fred and George were holding court, surrounded by admirers, demanding details of their latest prank. Hermione shook her head, returning to her ancient runes translation. "I'm sure he wouldn't tell me the truth anyway. Besides, I'm not sure I want to know. Some magic is better left as a mystery." Ron snorted. "Since when do you think any knowledge is better left unknown?" Before Hermione could respond, there was a soft pop and a house elf appeared beside their table. It was Dobby, his tennis ball-sized eyes wide with excitement, his tower of hats wobbling slightly as he bounced on the balls of his feet. "Harry Potter, sir. Dobby has brought something for Harry Potter and his friends." The house elf proudly held out a small basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Thanks, Dobby," Harry said, taking the basket with a curious smile. "What is it?" Dobby brought up some terrifying stories from Toy Story. "There are no terrors like the one about the talking socks, Sir Harry Potter and his friends," Dobby heard. "Dobby heard about the talking socks, sir, and thought perhaps Harry Potter might need new ones that are quiet and well-behaved." Harry couldn't help but laugh as he lifted the cloth to reveal several pairs of hand-knitted socks, each more colourful and mismatched than the last. One pair featured broomsticks zooming across a lime green background, another was striped in all the colours of the rainbow, and a third seemed to be decorated with what looked suspiciously like house elf faces. "These are brilliant, Dobby, thank you," Harry said, genuinely touched by the elf's thoughtfulness. Dobby's smile grew even wider, his ears perking up with pleasure. "Dobby is happy to help, sir. Dobby knitted them himself. They are guaranteed not to speak unless spoken to, sir." With that cryptic assurance and a final beaming smile, Dobby disappeared with another soft pop, leaving the trio staring at the basket of socks. "Unless spoken to?" Hermione repeated slowly, a note of alarm creeping into her voice. Does that mean they'll talk if we talk to them? Ron cautiously picked up the pair with broomsticks, holding them at arm's length. Hello? He said tentatively. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, in a polite, chirpy voice, the right sock said, Good evening. I am most pleased to make your acquaintance. I am designed for the right foot and am exceptionally good at preventing blisters. I specialize in arc support, added the left sock proudly. Unlike the dramatic, existential crisis-ridden socks from that morning, Dobby's creation seemed genuinely cheerful and practical. Their voices were soft and pleasant, with none of the theatrical despair that had characterized the enchanted laundry. The three friends looked at each other for a moment before bursting into laughter. Well, Hermione said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. At least they're polite and helpful, Ron added, examining the arch of the left sock with newfound appreciation. And very colourful, Harry contributed, holding up the rainbow-stripped pair, which took the opportunity to inform him that they were particularly effective at cheering up gloomy days. As the common room gradually emptied, students drifting up to their dormitories with yawns and murmured good nights, the trio remained by the fire, occasionally asking Dobby Socks questions and laughing at their earnest, often oddly specific responses. It was a perfect end to a bizarre day. Mundane magic and small wonders, friendship and laughter intertwined like colourful threads in a hand-knitted sock. Upstairs in his dormitory, George Weasley made a careful notation in a small leather-bound journal. The sock charm hadn't gone exactly as planned, but the results had exceeded his expectations in terms of entertainment value. Perhaps, with a few adjustments, a more targeted approach. He scribbled a few more notes, ideas already forming for improvements to the spell. On the floor beside his bed, a single sock, plain, white, and apparently ordinary, waited until he had extinguished his wand light and settled under the covers before whispering a single, satisfied, "Good night, Master of Mischief." Until the next adventure. George smiled into the darkness. Some magic, indeed, was better left as a mystery. In the girls' dormitory, Hermione carefully arranged her new socks in her bedside drawer, placing them alongside her carefully folded uniforms and neatly stacked books. As she closed the drawer, she thought she heard a faint sound, like a chorus of tiny voices singing a lullaby. But by the time she had pressed her ear to the wooden drawer front, the sound had faded, leaving her to wonder if it had been merely a trick of her tired mind. She climbed into bed, pulling the warm blankets up to her chin and allowing her eyes to drift closed. It had been a peculiar day, but then, at Hogwarts, even the most ordinary objects could contain unexpected magic. That was what made the wizarding world so wonderful. The constant possibility of enchantment in everyday things. The sense that around every corner and in every seemingly mundane moment, there might be something marvelous waiting to be discovered. As sleep began to claim her, Hermione found herself thinking of Dobby and his carefully knitted gifts. There was a special kind of magic in creating something with one's own hands, in imbuing an object with care and intention. Perhaps that was the most powerful enchantment of all, the simple magic of one being creating something to bring joy or comfort to another. In the quiet of the dormitory, with her roommate's gentle breathing creating a soothing rhythm in the darkness, Hermione dreamed of colourful threads weaving themselves into patterns, of objects coming to life with personality and purpose, and of a world where even the smallest, most overlooked things had stories to tell and wisdom to share. And in drawers and trunks throughout the castle, socks settled into contented silence, their day of glory complete, ready to return to their primary purpose of warming feet and preventing blisters. But perhaps, just perhaps, they would remember their brief moment of voice and visibility, their chance to share their unique perspective on the world of wizards and witches who so often took them for granted. For in the world of magic, even the most humble objects may contain unexpected depths, and sometimes the most profound wisdom comes from the most unlikely sources, even from a drawer full of socks. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with no sign of the previous day's sock chaos. Students dressed without theatrical accompaniment, though many reported that their socks seemed somehow more comfortable than usual, as if determined to prove their worth through exceptional performance, rather than dramatic declarations. At the Gryffindor table, the mood was light as students recounted their favorite sock monologues from the day before. Lavender Brown had kept a list of the most poetic declarations, while Colin Creevey claimed to have photographed a pair of particularly expressive Argyle socks mid-soliloquy. "Do you think they'll start up again?" Neville asked nervously, glancing down at his feet as if expecting a sudden outburst. "Nah," Fred assured him, reaching for another piece of toast. "That kind of charm burns itself out pretty quickly, though if you're missing the entertainment..." He waggled his eyebrows suggestively. "No!" chorused several nearby students, causing Fred to laugh and raise his hands in mock surrender. "Just an offer," he said innocently. As owls began to swoop into the great hall, delivering the morning mail in a flurry of feathers and packages, conversation turned to the day ahead. There was a charms test for the third years, Quidditch practice for Gryffindor in the afternoon, and persistent rumors of a surprise inspection of cauldron bottoms in potions that had Percy looking particularly smug. Life at Hogwarts was returning to its usual rhythms, the talking sock incident already beginning to settle into the collective memory of the castle, one more tale to be recounted to future students and reminisced about in years to come. Yet as Harry made his way to his first class of the day, he couldn't help but notice that he was paying more attention to the ordinary objects around him. The suits of armor that seemed to shift position when no one was looking, the portraits that whispered comments as students passed, the stones of the castle floor that had been worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. How many of these seemingly mundane things, he wondered, had stories to tell? How many secret enchantments and forgotten spells lingered in the corridors and classrooms of Hogwarts? The sock incident had served as a reminder that in the wizarding world, nothing was truly ordinary. Magic had a way of revealing itself in the most unexpected places, transforming the commonplace into the extraordinary with just a flick of a wand or a whispered incantation. Batman's Secret Empire, a refractory cortege, were conducting the cheering charm on Ron, who was already in good spirits and thus became almost hysterical with glee. He found himself wondering what the quills and parchment would say if given the chance to speak. Would they complain about being chewed on during moments of concentration? Would they boast about the elegant handwriting they had helped create, or lament the spelling errors they had been forced to record? The thought made him smile, earning him an approving nod from Professor Flitwick, who mistook his amusement for satisfaction with his charm work. "Excellent, Mr. Potter. 5 points to Gryffindor for that perfectly executed cheering charm." Ron, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes, gave Harry a thumbs up from behind Flitwick's back. Harry's smile widened. Sometimes the best magic happened by accident. During the lunch hour, as students gathered in the great hall once more, conversation inevitably returned to the talking sock phenomenon. Theories about how the charm had worked were exchanged across house tables, with Ravenclaw students offering particularly detailed hypotheses involving cross-spell contamination and acoustic enchantment principles. At the Hufflepuff table, a small group of first years were attempting to convince their socks to speak by whispering encouragement to their feet, much to the amusement of the older students. And at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was loudly proclaiming that no mere Weasley prank could ever affect his personally tailored, imported silk socks, though observers noted that he seemed to be wearing boots despite the unseasonably warm weather. They're still talking about it, Hermione noted as she joined Harry and Ron, setting her heavy book bag beside the bench with a thud that suggested she had once again borrowed the maximum allowed number of library books. Of course they are, Ron said, passing her the platter of sandwiches. It's not every day your clothing develops an existential crisis. Did you hear about Snape's socks? Professor Snape, Hermione corrected automatically. And no, what about them? Ron's eyes gleamed with mischievous delight. According to a second-year Slytherin who had detention last night, Snape's socks were reciting potions ingredients in alphabetical order, but with scathing commentary on their efficacy in various brews. Harry nearly choked on his pumpkin juice. You're joking. I'm not. Apparently, his left sock was particularly dismissive of foolish wand-waving and the obvious inferiority of store-bought asphodel. The mental image of Severus Snape, the intimidating potions master, being lectured by his own footwear was too much. Harry dissolved into laughter, joined moments later by Ron and, after a brief struggle with her respect for authority figures, Hermione. Their laughter attracted the attention of George, who slid onto the bench beside them, his expression one of benign curiosity. Sharing the joy of my accidental success, are we? Snape socks, Ron managed between gasps for air. Critique and potions ingredients. George's eyes widened in genuine surprise, followed by a slow, delighted grin. Now that I hadn't heard. Brilliant, though I can't take credit for any specific sock personalities. The charm was just supposed to make them give compliments. What went wrong? Hermione asked, her academic interest evident in her suddenly attentive posture. George shrugged, helping himself to an apple from the fruit bowl. Not entirely sure. I was working on combining a simple animation charm with a voice projection spell, nothing fancy. But I'd been experimenting with some enchanted ink earlier. You know, the kind that recites poetry when exposed to light. Hermione nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. And you think the magic from the ink somehow transferred to the charm you were casting on the socks? Must have done, George agreed, taking a bite of his apple. Though I can't explain why they all developed such dramatic personalities. The poetry ink was loaded with sonnets, not soliloquies. Maybe it's not just the ink, Harry suggested, remembering the peculiar personalities of Dobby's hand-knitted socks. Maybe socks just have a lot to say. George considered this, tilting his head thoughtfully. You know, you might be onto something there, Harry. Objects absorb ambient magic over time. That's why old wizarding homes often have peculiar quirks. Doors that only open if you ask politely. Windows that frost over when you're sad, that sort of thing. Maybe socks, being such personal items, absorb more than we realize. That's actually a fascinating theory, Hermione admitted, looking at George with newfound respect. There's very little research on the magical properties of everyday objects, but it makes sense that items in close contact with wizards might develop their own magical signatures over time. Exactly, George nodded, warming to the subject. And what's in closer contact than the things we wear, especially socks? They're with us all day, absorbing our magic, our emotions, our foot sweat. But that's less relevant to the theory. Ron grimaced. Thanks for that mental image. Always happy to expand your horizons, little brother, George replied cheerfully. Anyway, I might have accidentally tapped into something that was already there, a kind of sock consciousness, if you will. Well, that's ridiculous, Hermione began, but then paused, reconsidering. Although, in a world where paintings can talk and chess pieces have personalities. Exactly, George said triumphantly. Why not socks? The conversation might have continued in this philosophical vein, but it was interrupted by the arrival of the afternoon post, a second delivery for students who had packages too large or numerous for the morning owls to manage. A handsome, tawny owl swooped down to land in front of George, a small parcel attached to its leg. Ah, perfect timing, George said, untying the package and offering the owl a bit of his sandwich crust, which it accepted with a dignified hoot before taking flight once more. What's that? Ron asked, eyeing the parcel suspiciously. Not more enchanted clothing, I hope. No, George assured him, unwrapping the brown paper to reveal a small glass vial filled with a shimmering silver liquid. Just a little something for my next project. Nothing to worry about. The innocent tone of his voice and the mischievous twinkle in his eyes suggested that there was, perhaps, plenty to worry about. But that was the way of things at Hogwarts. One adventure barely concluded before the next began to unfold. As afternoon lessons commenced and the day continued its march toward evening, the talking sock incident gradually receded from immediate concern, becoming just another colourful thread in the rich tapestry of Hogwarts life. There would be other pranks, other unexpected magics, other moments of wonder and confusion and hilarity. Yet something of the experience lingered, a heightened awareness of the magic in mundane things, a tendency to listen a bit more carefully to the whispers of the castle, a willingness to consider the secret lives of objects that had previously been taken for granted. And if, in the weeks that followed, students occasionally addressed polite inquiries to their socks, or listened intently to the rustle of parchment for hidden messages, or regarded their quills with newfound respect, well, that was simply part of the ongoing education that Hogwarts provided, a reminder that in the wizarding world, the line between the ordinary and the extraordinary was as thin and permeable as a well-worn sock. As for the socks themselves, they had returned to their usual silent service, warming feet and preventing blisters without commentary or complaint. But sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, when the dormitories were dark and the castle slept, a careful listener might hear the faintest whisper of sock wisdom, observations about the day's events, gentle critiques of fashion choices, philosophical musings on the nature of paired existence. For once magic reveals itself, it can never truly be hidden again. And in the enchanted realm of Hogwarts' school of witchcraft and wizardry, even the humblest objects might contain unexpected depths, awaiting only the right spell or the right listener to share their unique perspective on the magical world. And so, as stars twinkled above the castle towers and the giant squid lazily patrolled the moonlit surface of the lake, the socks of Hogwarts settled into their drawers and trunks, silently observing, absorbing, remembering, until the next time someone thought to ask them what they thought about the curious business of wizarding life. For in a world of magic, nothing is ever truly ordinary, not even a drawerful of socks. Snow fell in gentle swirls beyond the frosted windows of Hogwarts Castle, each flake dancing on the winter breeze, before joining its companions in the growing blanket of white that transformed the grounds into a glistening wonderland. Inside, the ancient stone walls held warmth and light against the December chill, corridors aglow with floating candles and doorways adorned with evergreen boughs that filled the air with a fresh scent of pine. But nowhere in the vast castle was warmer or more fragrant than the kitchens, where dozens of house elves moved in a carefully choreographed ballet of preparation for the evening's winter feast. Among them, barely noticeable amid the hustle and bustle, worked an elderly house elf named Della, her small hands moving with practiced precision as she stirred a massive copper pot of pudding, her most treasured possession clutched close to her heart. A battered tin of spice, its label long since worn away, its contents known only to her. Della had served at Hogwarts for over 70 years, longer than most of the current professors had been alive. She had seen generations of students come and go, had weathered changes in headmasters and curriculum, had adapted to the shifting tastes and appetites of countless young witches and wizards. Through it all, she had maintained one unchanging tradition: her winter pudding, served at the last feast before the Christmas holiday, made with her family's secret spice. The recipe had been passed down through her family for as long as anyone could remember. Della's grandmother had taught it to her mother, who had taught it to Della when she was just an elfling with ears too big for her head and hands too small to hold a proper spoon. The spice itself was a complex blend of ingredients gathered from around the world: cinnamon from Ceylon, cardamom from the mountains of India, nutmeg from far-off islands, and other more mysterious components that her grandmother had refused to name even on her deathbed. Some things must remain secret, her grandmother had whispered, pressing the tin into Della's young hands. That is where their magic lives. Now, as Della carefully measured a precise pinch of the precious spice between her gnarled fingers, she could almost hear her grandmother's voice guiding her movements. The kitchen around her was a whirlwind of activity. House elves chopping vegetables, basting roasts, kneading dough, polishing silverware. But Della worked in a small bubble of calm concentration, her focus entirely on the pudding that bubbled gently before her. The aroma that rose from the pot as the spice made contact with the simmering mixture was immediate and transformative. It was the scent of winter evenings by the fire, of homecomings after long journeys, of childhood memories wrapped in warm blankets. It was comfort and joy distilled into fragrance, and it caused several nearby house elves to pause in their tasks, noses twitching appreciatively. Della's pudding, they murmured with reverent smiles before returning to their work. It was an annual moment of quiet celebration in the kitchen, this first breath of Della's special creation. At the massive preparation table nearby, Mimsy, a younger house elf with bright eyes and a perpetually worried expression, was decorating individual pudding portions with sprigs of holly. She paused in her task, watching as Della stirred the magical spice into the mixture. Mimsy has always wondered, she ventured shyly, what is in Della's special spice? Della's ancient face crinkled into a smile, the web of wrinkles around her eyes deepening. If Mimsy knew, it would not be special anymore, she replied, her voice gentle but firm. Some magics must be kept secret to keep their power. Mimsy nodded respectfully, though her curious eyes lingered on the small tin that Della tucked back into the pocket of her tea-towel dress. There were many rumors about Della's spice among the house elves, that it contained powdered moonstone, that it was blessed by mer people under the full moon, that it included a tear freely given by a phoenix. Della neither confirmed nor denied these speculations, allowing the mystery to perpetuate itself year after year. The truth, known only to Della, was both simpler and more complex than any of these fantastical theories. The spice was indeed special, But its magic lay not in exotic ingredients or elaborate enchantments, but in the love and tradition that had infused it over generations. Each time the recipe was passed down, each time the spice was used to bring joy to others, its power grew stronger. It was magic of the most fundamental kind, the magic of connection, of memory, of service rendered with a full heart. As Della completed her stirring, exactly 7 times clockwise, 3 times counterclockwise, as her grandmother had taught her, she stepped back to allow the pudding its final simmer. The rich, dark mixture bubbled contentedly, occasional wisps of fragrant steam escaping to join the symphony of aromas that filled the kitchen. Through the enchanted serving hatches, Della could hear the distant sounds of students gathering in the great hall above. The end-of-term feast was always a joyous occasion, filled with laughter and anticipation of the holiday to come. For many students, this would be their last proper meal before returning home to their families. For others, those who remained at Hogwarts over the break, it would be the beginning of a different kind of Christmas. Quieter, perhaps, but no less magical in its own way. Della had prepared her pudding for all of them, each spoonful designed to evoke the feeling of home, wherever and whatever that might be for each individual who tasted it. That was the true secret of her spice. It tasted like coming home. The kitchen's massive clock chimed, indicating that the feast would be starting momentarily. House elves scurried with increased urgency, putting final touches on elaborate dishes and arranging them on the serving tables that would magically transfer the food to identical tables in the great hall above. "First course ready," called out Vobby, the kitchen's unofficial coordinator, his high voice rising above the clatter and bustle. With a synchronized snap of fingers, dozens of house elves sent the first course, a delicate soup of winter vegetables garnished with fresh herbs, ascending through the ceiling to appear on the tables above. The magic was precise, ensuring that not a drop was spilled in transit, that each bowl arrived at exactly the perfect temperature for consumption. Della moved her pudding to the dessert table, where it would wait patiently until its moment arrived. She lovingly arranged the individual portions that Mimsy had decorated, ensuring that each holly sprig was perfectly positioned, each serving identical in size and presentation. In the world of house elves, such uniformity was a point of pride. No student should receive less than another. No portion should be more appealing than its neighbor. As the main courses began their journey upward, roast turkeys and hams, potatoes prepared 3 different ways, vegetables both familiar and exotic, gravies and sauces and accompaniments of all descriptions. Della slipped away from the dessert table and made her way to her favorite observation spot. It was a small alcove near one of the magical serving hatches, positioned in such a way that she could catch glimpses of the great hall above without being easily noticed herself. From this vantage point, she watched as the feast began in earnest. The 4 long house tables were filled with students in their black robes, many already sporting festive accessories. Twinkling star earrings, holly-peppered neckties, the occasional hat bewitched to softly glow with colored lights. The enchanted ceiling above them displayed the gently falling snow, mirroring the scene outside the castle windows, but without the accompanying chill. At the high table, the professors sat in varying states of festive cheer. Professor Dumbledore's eyes twinkled as brightly as the silver stars adorning his midnight groom robes, while Professor McGonagall maintained her usual dignity, despite the small tartan bow that had appeared in her hair for the occasion. Even Professor Snape seemed slightly less severe than usual, though he steadfastly ignored the Christmas cracker that Professor Flitwick was enthusiastically offering him. Della watched as students filled their plates, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of thousands of candles floating overhead. There was a special kind of magic in these moments. Young people gathered together, sharing food and friendship, momentarily forgetting the pressures of exams and assignments in the simple pleasure of a good meal. Back in the kitchen, the house elves were already beginning preparations for the dessert course. Trifles were given their final layer of whipped cream, fruit compotes were artfully arranged in crystal bowls, and delicate pastries were dusted with powdered sugar that mimicked the snow falling outside. And in the center of it all waited Della's pudding, its rich aroma growing stronger as it was magically maintained at the perfect serving temperature. As the main course dishes began to return to the kitchen, some entirely empty, others with only the barest remnants of their contents, the house elves moved into the final phase of the feast. Desserts were positioned on the serving tables, given one last inspection, and then, with another synchronized snap, sent upward to delight the waiting students. Della hurried back to her observation spot, her heart beating a little faster as she pictured her pudding arriving before the young witches and wizards. This was the moment she waited for all year. The first expressions of surprise and delight as they tasted her creation. Through the magical hatch, she could see the desserts appearing on the tables, could hear the appreciative murmurs that swept through the hall. And then, as the first students helped themselves to the pudding, she saw what she had been waiting for, that widening of eyes, that small involuntary smile that spread across each face as the secret spice worked its particular magic. Those two words ready. At the Hufflepuff table, Hannah Abbott closed her eyes as she tasted her first spoonful, a look of pure contentment washing over her features. Nearby, Justin Finch Fletchley was describing the taste to his table mates with animated gestures, clearly struggling to find words adequate to the experience. Ravenclaw. Luna Lovegood gazed dreamily at her pudding, commenting to no one in particular that it tasted like the first day of snow and the last day of summer combined. Several of her housemates looked confused by this description, but nodded in agreement nonetheless. The Slytherins, generally more reserved in their displays of emotion, were showing their appreciation in subtler ways. Second helpings discreetly acquired, small nods of approval exchanged, the occasional reluctant smile breaking through carefully maintained composure. And at the Gryffindor table, Della could see young Harry Potter, his perpetually messy hair even more disheveled than usual, taking a bite and then pausing, a complex array of emotions crossing his face. There was delight, certainly, but also something deeper, a kind of wistful longing that suggested the pudding had evoked memories or desires particularly potent for him. Beside him, Ron Weasley was already on his second serving, while Hermione Granger was engaged in animated speculation about the possible ingredients. Even at the high table, the professors were not immune to the pudding's charm. Professor Sprout was beaming with unabashed pleasure, Professor Flitwick was applauding softly after each bite, and Professor McGonagall's stern features had softened into something approaching sentimentality. Professor Dumbledore caught Della's eye across the distance and raised his spoon in a small salute, his knowing smile suggesting that he, at least, might have some inkling of the pudding's secret. Della felt a warm glow of satisfaction spread through her chest. This was why she continued to make the pudding year after year, why she guarded the secret of the spice so carefully, why she took such pride in this particular tradition. It wasn't about recognition or praise, house elves rarely received either, but about the simple joy of bringing comfort and happiness to others, especially during the winter season when hearts sometimes grew heavy with the darkness and cold. As she watched the students enjoying their dessert, laughing and talking among themselves, Della remembered other feasts, other years, other young faces lit by candlelight. She had seen students come as first years, wide-eyed and uncertain, and leave as confident young adults ready to make their way in the wizarding world. She had witnessed friendships form and deepen over shared meals, had observed the subtle dance of adolescent romance played out across the tables, had seen rivalries temporarily set aside in the universal appreciation of a well-prepared feast. Through it all, her pudding had been a constant, a small but meaningful thread in the complex tapestry of Hogwarts traditions. And though few students would ever know her name or recognize her contribution, Della found deep satisfaction in being part of something larger than herself, in maintaining a connection to her past while helping to create memories that young witches and wizards would carry with them into their futures. As the feast began to wind down, students lingering over final bites of dessert and last cups of hot chocolate, Della returned to the kitchen. The cleanup process was already underway, with house elves efficiently managing the return of dishes and the disposal of any leftovers. Della's pudding bowl was notably empty, not a single serving remaining, a silent testament to its popularity. Della's pudding was a great success, as always, Mimsy said, appearing at her side with a warm smile. Mimsy heard the Ravenclaw prefect say it was the best she'd ever tasted. Della nodded, accepting the compliment with quiet dignity. "It is good that they enjoyed it," she said simply, beginning to clean her special copper pot with careful attention. The pot itself was almost as important as the spice. Her grandmother had been very clear about that. The magic lived in the combination of elements, in the relationship between ingredients and implements, in the harmony of process and intention. As she worked, occasionally pausing to rest her aged hands, Della found herself thinking about the future. She was old for a house elf, and though her magic remained strong, her body was beginning to show the effects of her long years of service. Eventually, the time would come to pass on her secret, to ensure that the tradition of the winter pudding continued after she was gone. Her gaze wandered to where Mimsy was arranging clean dishes with meticulous care, her young face serious with concentration. Perhaps, Della thought, it was time to begin sharing some of her knowledge, to start the long process of teaching the next generation. Not the final secret of the spice, not yet, but the foundations upon which that secret rested. Decision made, Della called softly, "Mimsy, would you come help Della with something?" The younger elf immediately set aside her task and hurried over, eager to be of assistance. What can Mimsy do for Della? Della would like to show Mimsy the proper way to clean the pudding pot, she said, gesturing to the copper vessel. It requires special care. Mimsy's eyes widened at this unexpected honor. Among the house elves, being invited to learn one of Della's techniques was a rare distinction. "Mimsy would be most honored," she said, her voice hushed with respect. And so, as the kitchen's activity gradually subsided, the last dishes were put away, and the younger elves began to prepare for the next day's breakfast. Della shared the first of many lessons with her chosen successor. She demonstrated the precise circular motion needed to polish the inside of the pot, the specific mixture of cleaning agents that would preserve its particular properties, the gentle handling required to maintain its magic. Mimsy watched and imitated with solemn attention, understanding instinctively that she was being offered more than just a cleaning lesson. When they had finished, the pot gleaming in the kitchen's warm light, Della nodded in satisfaction. "Mimsy has good hands," she said, the highest compliment one house elf could offer another in the context of their work. Della will teach Mimsy more, if she wishes to learn. Mimsy's face lit up with joy and gratitude. "Oh yes, Mimsy wishes very much to learn from Della. Mimsy will be the best student." Della smiled, patting the younger elf's hand. "We will begin tomorrow," she promised. "There is much to know about pudding magic." As the kitchen finally quieted for the night, most of the house elves retiring to their quarters for a few hours of rest before the pre-dawn breakfast preparations would begin, Della lingered a moment longer. She took out her spice tin one more time, holding it close to her heart. "Grandmother," she whispered to the empty kitchen, "Della has found someone to carry on our tradition. Della hopes you would approve." In the silence that followed, Della felt a sense of peace settle over her, as if her grandmother's spirit had indeed heard and blessed her decision. The secret would continue, the magic would endure, the tradition would remain unbroken. That was all that truly mattered. Tucking the tin securely back into her pocket, Della made her way to her sleeping quarters, a small but comfortable nook hidden behind a tapestry of dancing fruit, furnished with a miniature bed covered in clean tea towels and a tiny bedside table that held her few personal possessions. As she settled beneath her blanket, she could still hear the distant sounds of students making their way from the great hall to their common rooms, their voices carrying the lively energy of young people anticipating the holiday ahead. Della closed her eyes, a small smile playing on her lips as she drifted towards sleep. In her dreams, she was young again, standing beside her grandmother in a different kitchen, learning the secret of the spice for the first time. The dream was vivid and warm, filled with the same aromas that had perfumed the Hogwarts kitchen earlier that evening. "Remember, little one," her grandmother said in the dream, her voice as clear as if she were truly present. "The most powerful magic often hides in the simplest acts of love." While Della slept peacefully in her tiny bed, the castle around her continued its nighttime routines. Prefects patrolled corridors, professors finished grading last-minute assignments, and students packed trunks for the journey home that would begin in the morning. The snow continued to fall outside, adding another layer to the white blanket covering the grounds, muffling sounds and transforming the landscape into a scene from a holiday card. In the Gryffindor common room, Harry Potter sat by the fire, watching the flames dance as his friends engaged in a final game of exploding snap before bed. The taste of Della's pudding lingered in his memory, evoking feelings he couldn't quite name. A sense of belonging, perhaps, a connection to something timeless and comforting that transcended his complicated past and uncertain future. "Pudding at dinner," he said suddenly, interrupting Ron's triumphant crow as he won the game. "Did it taste like, I don't know, like home to you?" Ron looked thoughtful, an unusual expression for him when food was the topic. "Yeah, actually," he said after a moment. "Like Christmas at the Burrow, even though I can't remember Mum ever making anything quite like it. For me, it was like my grandparents' house during winter holidays," Hermione added, her eyes taking on a faraway look. "That's strange, isn't it? We all tasted something different, but it gave us all the same feeling. Must be some kind of charm on it," Ron suggested, gathering up the cards for another round. "Pretty brilliant magic, really." Harry nodded, turning back to the fire. "Yes," he agreed softly. "Brilliant magic. None of them knew Della's name, or the history of her spice, or the tradition she maintained year after year. They didn't need to. The magic had reached them nonetheless, had given them exactly what they needed in that moment. A taste of home, a feeling of belonging, a momentary respite from the complexities of growing up in a world that sometimes demanded too much of them too soon. And that, after all, was the true purpose of Della's pudding. Not to draw attention or acclaim to herself, but to create a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy for those who tasted it. The secret of the spice was safe for another year, its magic undiminished, its tradition intact. And somewhere in the castle, an elderly house elf slept soundly, wrapped in the satisfaction of a task well done, and the knowledge that her legacy would continue. Morning came to Hogwarts in a burst of pale winter sunlight that transformed the snow-covered grounds into a dazzling expanse of white, so bright it almost hurt to look at directly. Students moved through the corridors with the energetic chaos that always preceded a major departure, dragging trunks, calling to friends, making last-minute arrangements for the holiday break. In the kitchen, breakfast preparations were well underway. The house elves moved with their usual efficient grace, though perhaps a bit faster than normal, aware that the students would be eager to eat quickly and board the Hogwarts Express for their journey home. Della, despite her age, was already at her workstation, preparing a batch of her special cinnamon porridge, not as dramatic as her winter pudding, but a breakfast tradition she maintained during the cold months. As she stirred the fragrant mixture, Mimsy appeared at her side, eager for the promised lessons. "Good morning, Della," she said, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Mimsy is ready to learn, as Della promised." Della smiled, nodding toward a small copper pot she had set aside. Not her treasured pudding pot, but a similar one, well-worn and clearly well-loved. "Today, Della will teach Mimsy about choosing the right vessel for different foods," she said. "This is the porridge pot. It has served Della for 43 years. Mimsy listened with rapt attention as Della explained the properties of different metals, the importance of seasoning a pot properly, the way magic could infuse cooking implements over time if they were used with consistent intention. It was fundamental knowledge, nothing secret or spectacular, but Mimsy treated each word as a precious gift, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that impressed Della with their insight. As they worked side by side, other house elves occasionally glanced their way, understanding that something significant was unfolding. It was rare for Della to take such an interest in training a younger elf, and the implications were clear to those who had served alongside her for decades. A tradition was being passed down, a continuity established that would extend beyond any individual's service. Breakfast was served with the usual house elf efficiency, though it received less appreciation than the previous night's feast, consumed as it was amid the excitement and distraction of imminent departure. Still, Della noticed several students pausing over their porridge, a look of pleasant surprise crossing their faces as they tasted the subtle blend of cinnamon and other spices she had incorporated. After the meal, as the house elves began the cleanup process, Della led Mimsy to a quieter corner of the kitchen. From her pocket, she withdrew a small pouch made of faded blue fabric embroidered with tiny stars. "This," she said, untying the drawstring, "is Della's collection of cinnamon. See how there are different kinds." Mimsy peered into the pouch, where several types of cinnamon sticks and powders were separated into tiny compartments. Some were reddish-brown, others more grey, some finely ground and others in chunky pieces. "Each one has its own character," Della explained, allowing Mimsy to smell the different varieties. "Ceylon cinnamon is sweet and delicate. Cassia cinnamon is stronger, more pungent. This one from Vietnam has notes of clove. This rare one from a hidden valley in China carries the scent of ancient forests." Mimsy's eyes widened as she detected the subtle differences between the samples. Mimsy never knew cinnamon could be so complicated, she admitted. Della nodded sagely. "Most wizards and witches do not notice such things. They think cinnamon is just cinnamon, sugar is just sugar, flour is just flour. But for those who work with food magic, These distinctions matter greatly. She returned the cinnamon pouch to her pocket, her expression turning more serious. What Della is teaching Mimsy is not the secret of the winter pudding, not yet, but it is the foundation upon which such secrets are built. Understanding the true nature of ingredients, respecting their magic, learning to combine them in ways that honor their essence. This is the beginning of all food enchantment. Mimsy nodded solemnly, clearly appreciating the gravity of the lesson. Mimsy will study hard and learn everything Della wishes to teach, she promised. As the morning progressed, the sounds of departure grew louder from the floors above. The Hogwarts Express would be leaving from Hogsmeade Station at 11 o'clock, and students were gathering in the entrance hall, bundled in cloaks and scarves against the winter chill, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air as they filed out of the castle. The kitchens grew quieter as breakfast cleanup concluded and lunch preparations, a simpler affair than usual given how many students would be leaving, got underway. Della sent Mimsy to help with vegetable preparation, promising to continue their lessons later. Left alone for a moment, Della found herself drawn once again to her observation spot near the magical hatch. From there she could glimpse the entrance hall, where students were saying temporary goodbyes to friends who would be staying at the castle over the break. There were hugs and promises to write, exchanges of small holiday gifts, final arrangements being made for the new term in January. As she watched, Delia felt the familiar mix of emotions that always accompanied this time of year. A touch of melancholy at seeing the castle's population diminish, but also satisfaction at having contributed to their final feast before departure, at having given them a taste of home to carry with them on their journey. Movement nearby caught her attention. Dobby, the free elf who had chosen to work at Hogwarts, was arranging a tray of sandwiches with his usual enthusiastic flair. Unlike most house elves, Dobby wore an assortment of mismatched clothing. Today, it was a tea-cozy hat, a child's soccer jersey, one argyle sock, and one sock covered in moving images of leaping frogs. Della had initially been wary of Dobby, as were many of the Hogwarts elves. His pride in his free status and his enthusiasm for wages contradicted everything they had been taught about proper house elf behavior, but over time she had come to respect his dedication to his work and his unwavering loyalty to Harry Potter. Dobby is making special sandwiches for Harry Potter and his friends, Dobby explained when he noticed Della watching him. They are taking the long train journey home today. Della nodded, understanding the impulse to provide comfort through food to those one cared about. It was a universal language, transcending the usual boundaries between beings. Della's pudding made Harry Potter very happy last night, Dobby continued, his large eyes shining with approval. Dobby saw him take 2 helpings. Despite herself, Della felt a small surge of pride. Della is glad Harry Potter enjoyed it, she said simply. Dobby's expression turned wistful. Dobby wishes he knew how to make food that brings such memories. Dobby was never taught cooking in his old family's home. Della hesitated, an unprecedented thought forming in her mind. House elves generally kept their special techniques within their own family lines, passing them down through generations. But Dobby had no family at Hogwarts, no elder elf to teach him the finer points of food magic. And despite his unconventional status, his heart was undeniably in the right place. Perhaps, she said slowly, Dobby would like to learn some of Della's simpler recipes? Not the winter pudding, she added quickly, seeing his eyes widen with excitement, but other things that might please Harry Potter and his friends. Dobby's entire face lit up with joy, his ears perking up so dramatically they nearly dislodged his tea-cozy hat. "But Bobby would be most honored," he squeaked, bouncing slightly on his toes. Dobby would learn very carefully and practice most diligently. Della found herself smiling at his enthusiasm. Very well, Dobby may join Della and Mimsy for tomorrow's lesson, if he wishes. The idea of teaching her cooking techniques to a free elf would have been unthinkable to Della just a few years ago. But times were changing in the wizarding world, and perhaps it was fitting that traditions should adapt as well. The essence would remain the same: the care, the attention to detail, the intention to bring comfort and joy through food, even as the specific circumstances evolved. By midday, the castle had grown noticeably quieter. The majority of students had departed for Hogsmeade Station, leaving behind only those few who would be spending the holiday at Hogwarts. The Great Hall, when lunch was served, contained only a scattering of students at each house table, their small groups making the vast space seem even larger and more echoing than usual. Della observed them through her magical hatch as they ate the simple lunch that had been prepared. Sandwiches, soup, fresh fruit, and slices of the previous night's leftover cakes and tarts. They seemed subdued compared to their usual boisterous energy, perhaps feeling the temporary absence of their friends, or anticipating the strange quiet that always descended over the castle during the holiday break. At one end of the Gryffindor table, Della noticed Harry Potter sitting with the youngest Weasley boy and the clever Granger girl. They had chosen to remain at Hogwarts this Christmas, it seemed. Harry Potter was often among those who stayed. Della had noticed this pattern over the years and had always made sure that the Christmas feast was especially comforting for those who could not go home for the holiday. Watching them, Della felt a renewed sense of purpose. The winter pudding had been just the beginning. The Christmas feast would be another opportunity to bring the feeling of home to those who remained within Hogwarts walls. And beyond that, each meal served in the coming year would be a chance to nurture and comfort through food, to practice the magic that had been her family's legacy for generations. As the afternoon shadows lengthened and the snow began to fall once more outside the castle windows, Della returned to her daily tasks, her mind already planning the menus for the days ahead. The kitchen hummed with quieter activity now, the house elves taking advantage of the reduced demands to deep clean certain areas and prepare ingredients for future meals. Mimsy found Della sorting through a cabinet of spices, carefully examining each jar and setting some aside for replacement. "Della," she said hesitantly, "Mimsy has been thinking about what Della taught this morning, about how different types of the same spice can have different characters." Della nodded encouragingly, pleased that the younger elf had been reflecting on their lesson. "Mimsy wonders," she continued, her voice gaining confidence, "if the same might be true of house elves, that even though we are all house elves, each of us has a different character that affects the magic we create." Della paused in her task, surprised and impressed by the insight. "Yes," she said after a moment of thought. "Della believes this is true. Each elf brings their own magic to their work. This is why some are better with cleaning charms, others with mending spells, others with food enchantments." Mintly nodded, clearly pleased to have her intuition confirmed. "And that is why Della's pudding is special, because it has Della's particular magic in it." "Partly," Della acknowledged, "but also because it carries the magic of Della's mother and grandmother and all those who came before. Magic accumulates over time, you see. It grows stronger with each generation that maintains the tradition." She returned to her sorting, but her mind continued to ponder Mimsy's question. It was true that her pudding was special because of the family magic it contained, but it was also true that each elf who learned the recipe would inevitably add their own character to it. their own magical signature. The pudding made by Mimsy one day would not be identical to Della's, just as Della's was not identical to her grandmother's, and yet the essence would remain. The ability to evoke home and comfort, to create a moment of warmth in the depths of winter. There was wisdom in that realization, a comforting thought about the nature of traditions and how they endured through change rather than despite it. The secret spice would remain secret, but it would also evolve, gathering new meanings and associations as it passed from one generation to the next. As darkness fell early, as it always did in December, the castle's windows began to glow with warm light, creating squares of gold against the stone walls. Inside the kitchen, the house elves prepared for dinner, a simpler meal than the previous night's feast, but still crafted with care and attention to detail. Della, overseeing the preparation of a rich winter stew, felt a deep sense of contentment. Her pudding had brought joy to the students before their departure, and now she was beginning the process of passing her knowledge to the next generation. The cycle would continue, the magic would endure, the traditions would adapt and survive. And next December, when snow once again blanketed the Hogwarts grounds and students gathered for the end of the term feast, the winter pudding would appear on the tables as it always did, carrying within it the secret spice and all the love and tradition it represented. Some things changed, yes, but others remained gloriously, comfortingly the same. As Della stirred her stew, humming softly to herself, she thought of all the feasts to come, all the students yet to experience the magic of her family's recipes, all the moments of connection and comfort still to be created. And in the warm, fragrant kitchen of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, surrounded by the gentle magic of everyday care, she knew that her grandmother would be proud. The snow continued to fall outside, transforming the world into a blank canvas waiting to be written upon. Inside, the fires burned brightly, keeping the cold at bay, and in a small tin, tucked safely in a house elf's pocket, a secret spice waited patiently for the next time it would be called upon to work its particular, precious magic. The magic of home, of tradition, of love made tangible through the simple, powerful act of feeding others. The ancient clock in the Hogwarts library marked the midnight hour with 12 gentle chimes that resonated through the cavernous space before dissolving into silence. Dust motes floated lazily in the glow of enchanted lanterns, their light dimmed to a warm amber that cast long, gentle shadows across endless rows of bookshelves. The massive oak doors had been closed hours ago, the last student having departed well before curfew, leaving behind only the whispered conversations of restless books and the occasional rustle of pages turning of their own accord. It was in this peaceful solitude that Nobby the house elf moved quietly between the towering shelves, his tiny feet padding softly across the worn stone floor as he meticulously returned each abandoned tome to its proper place, his large eyes heavy with the weight of a long day's work. Nobby had been assigned to the library for nearly 40 years now, outlasting 2 librarians and witnessing generations of students come and go. He took great pride in his work, understanding the delicate balance required to maintain the vast collection of magical knowledge. Books of spells needed to be handled with particular care. Some had a tendency to bite if approached too hastily, others emitted mournful wails when left open, and a few notorious volumes had been known to spontaneously combust if shelved incorrectly. Tonight, as on all nights, Nobby worked methodically through his tasks. His spindly fingers turned each spine to face outward at precisely the same angle. He carefully removed bookmarks forgotten by hurried students, placing them in a small drawer of his own creation labeled Lost Thinking Ribbons. He dusted shelves with a specially enchanted cloth that removed ordinary dust while leaving the beneficial magical residue that helped preserve ancient parchments. The work was repetitive but satisfying, a nightly ritual that brought order to the chaos invariably created during the day. Nobby found comfort in the familiar routine, in knowing that his efforts, though largely unseen, helped maintain the repository of magical knowledge that had educated witches and wizards for centuries. As he worked, the portraits that hung between the bookshelves observed him with fond familiarity. Unlike the more populous corridors of the castle, the library housed only a select few painted inhabitants, scholars and librarians from Hogwarts' long history, chosen for their appreciation of quiet and their devotion to knowledge. The Transfiguration section is particularly untidy tonight, remarked Madame Pinsforth, a stern-looking witch from the 16th century who had established the library's first organizational system. Her portrait hung near the restricted section, giving her a broad view of the main floor. Nobby nodded without pausing in his work. Yes, Madame Pinsforth. The fifth years were practicing their white preparation today. Many reference books were consulted. The portrait replied, though her painted features softened slightly. At least they're studying. In my day, we had to threaten students with transfiguration into bookmarks to get them to take their examinations seriously. From his frame near the astronomy section, Professor Constable Wigglesworth chuckled softly, his long silver beard quivering. You always were dramatic, Eulalia. As I recall, you once suggested to Headmaster Everard that failing students should be transformed into library ladders. And a fine idea it was, Madame Pinsforth sniffed. They would have finally been of some use to the pursuit of knowledge. Nobby's lips twitched in a small smile as he continued his work, listening to the familiar bickering of the portraits. After so many years, their conversations had become a comforting backdrop to his nightly duties, as much a part of the library as the scent of parchment and binding glue. The hour grew later, the enchanted lanterns dimming further in response to the deepening night. Outside the high-arched windows, the moon emerged from behind a cloud, casting silver beams across the polished wooden tables where countless students had pored over assignments through the centuries. Nobby stifled a yawn as he climbed a rolling ladder to return a particularly heavy volume on advanced runic translations to its home on the topmost shelf. The book grumbled sleepily as he slid it into place, its pages rustling in what might have been a sigh of contentment. Nearly finished, Nobby? Asked the gentle voice of healer Theodora Mugwort from her portrait near the medicinal herbology section. Unlike her more acerbic colleagues, healer Mugwort spoke with the soft, soothing tones she had used to comfort patients during her living years at St. Mungo's. Just a few more tasks, Madame Mugwort, Nobby replied, descending the ladder with practiced ease. The fire needs tending, and Nobby must check the restricted section for any signs of disturbance. The restricted section was always the last part of his routine, partly because it required special care, and partly because Nobby, despite his years of service, still found the chained books, with their ominous whispers, somewhat unsettling. Better to save that task for last, when the night was at its deepest and the castle at its quietest. First, though, he made his way to the enormous fireplace that dominated the far wall of the library. During the day, it burned with a cheerful blaze that warmed students studying nearby. At night, it was allowed to die down to glowing embers, providing just enough warmth to keep the dampness at bay and protect the precious books from moisture. Nobby knelt before the hearth, feeling the pleasant heat against his face as he arranged a new log on the bed of coals. He whispered a simple elvish charm, not the complex spellwork of wizards, but the more fundamental magic of his kind, magic tied to hearth and home and the nurturing of spaces. The embers brightened in response, small flames licking lazily at the fresh wood, which began to crackle softly. The library's fireplace was special, designed by Rowena Ravenclaw herself to provide warmth without risk to the precious books. The flames gave off heat and light, but produced no smoke that might damage ancient parchments. Instead, the smoke was magically redirected outside through enchanted channels in the stone, emerging from the mouths of gargoyles perched along the castle's exterior. As Nobby watched the flames grow stronger, he felt the accumulated fatigue of the day settling into his small body. It had been an unusually busy week at Hogwarts, with end-of-term examinations approaching and students spending long hours in the library. The house elves had been working tirelessly to maintain the castle while accommodating the heightened stress levels of its human inhabitant. Just a moment's rest, Nobby thought, allowing himself to sink down beside the hearth. The stone floor before the fireplace had been worn smooth by centuries of use, and a thick rug, faded now but still bearing the intricate pattern of intertwined magical creatures, provided unexpected comfort. The warmth of the fire seeped into his tired muscles, and Nobby found his eyelids growing heavier by the second. He would just rest for a moment, he decided, before tackling the restricted section. Just a brief respite to restore his energy. Curling his thin body into a small ball, Nobby nestled against the stack of cushions that had been abandoned by students earlier in the evening. His large ears twitched once, then relaxed as his breathing deepened. From their frames, the portrait inhabitants watched the little elves surrender to sleep with knowing expressions. "Poor creature," murmured Healer Mugwort. "He works so diligently." "Indeed," agreed Professor Wigglesworth, his painted eyes twinkling kindly behind half-moon spectacles. "Perhaps we should allow him this small comfort." As in Pinsforth harumphed softly, but there was no real disapproval in the sound. "I suppose the restricted section can survive one night without inspection," she conceded. "Though if any of those advanced necromancy volumes start wailing again, I shall hold you personally responsible, Constable." As the portraits continued their hushed conversation, something remarkable began to happen in the physical space of the library. It started subtly, a gentle stirring of air, a whisper of movement among the shelves. Then, from a forgotten corner near the History of Magic section, a small hand-knitted blanket rose from a lost-and-found box. It hovered momentarily, as if getting its bearings, before floating serenely across the library toward the sleeping elf. The blanket was clearly ancient, its once vibrant colors faded to soft pastels, its edges frayed from decades of use. It had been left behind by a student many years ago and had resided in the lost and found ever since, unclaimed and almost forgotten. Now, guided by the strange ambient magic that permeated Hogwarts, that unique blend of intention and emotion and centuries of spellcasting that gave the castle its semi-sentient nature, the blanket had found a new purpose. With gentle precision, it unfolded itself mid-air and settled over Nobby's small form, tucking in around his shoulders and feet with the tender care of a parent putting a child to bed. The elf stirred slightly at the touch but did not wake, instead snuggling deeper into the unexpected warmth with a small sigh of contentment. "Well," said Professor Wigglesworth softly, "it appears Hogwarts itself has decided our Nobby deserves a proper rest. The castle has always had a fondness for the elves." Healer Mugwort nodded, They care for it, and in its way, it cares for them. Even Madame Pinceforth seemed touched by the sight. I suppose rest is necessary for all creatures, she admitted. Even the most dedicated require respite occasionally. As if responding to their observations, the enchanted lanterns dimmed further, creating a cocoon of gentle shadow around the sleeping elf. The fire adjusted its flames, maintaining a steady, soothing warmth without crackling loudly enough to disturb Nobby's slumber. Throughout the vast space of the library, books that had been restlessly shifting settled into silence, as if the entire collection was collectively holding its breath to allow the elf his well-earned rest. The portraits, too, fell quiet, communicating only in occasional whispers and meaningful glances. Though they rarely left their frames within the library, they could visit other portraits throughout the castle, and several took this opportunity to slip away temporarily, spreading the word to ensure that Nobby would remain undisturbed. In the entrance hall, Sir Cadogan was instructed not to embark on any noisy quests near the library wing. The fat lady agreed to sing her morning scales a bit more softly than usual. Even Peeves the poltergeist, notorious for his disruptive antics, was firmly warned by the bloody Baron to avoid the library corridors until further notice. Back in the library, as the night deepened toward the witching hour, something even more unusual occurred. From the shelves nearest the fireplace, books began to emerge, sliding out just far enough to open their covers slightly. One by one they began to not the discontented muttering that some volumes were known for, but a harmonious, gentle melody that blended with the soft crackling of the fire to create a lullaby of sorts. It was said among the older house elves that books absorbed something of the magic and emotions of those who read them, retaining impressions of countless hands that had turned their pages and minds that had absorbed their knowledge. Now these accumulated impressions manifested as a collective gesture of gratitude toward the small being who had cared for them so diligently over the decades. Illuminated manuscripts glowed faintly, their enchanted illustrations moving in gentle rhythm with the humming. A bestiary opened to reveal illustrated creatures that enacted a slow, peaceful dance across its pages. A star chart unfurled slightly, its constellations twinkling in perfect miniature. "In all my years," whispered Madame Pinceforth, genuine wonder breaking through her usually stern demeanor, "I have never seen the library respond quite like this. Magic recognizes respect," Professor Wigglesworth replied softly. "And Nobby has always treated these books with the utmost care." As the night progressed, this unusual vigil continued, the portraits watchful, the books humming their gentle tune, the blanket adjusting itself when Nobby shifted in his sleep. Outside, clouds drifted across the moon, and occasionally an owl swooped past the high windows, its silhouette briefly visible against the night sky. In the deepest part of the night, when even the most studious Ravenclaws had long since retired to their dormitories, and the entire castle seemed suspended in dreams, the library door creaked open slightly. A tall figure in flowing robes stood silhouetted in the entrance, silvery beard gleaming in the dim light. "Headmaster," acknowledged Madame Pinceforth in a hushed tone. "We did not expect a visit at this hour." Albus Dumbledore stepped fully into the library, closing the door silently behind him. His half-moon spectacles reflected the gentle glow of the fire as he surveyed the scene before him. The sleeping house elf curled beneath a blanket, the softly humming books, the attentive portraits. "I find that midnight wanderings often lead to the most interesting discoveries," Dumbledore replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The castle informed me that something unusual was occurring in the library tonight. He approached the hearth with soundless steps, observing Nobby's peaceful slumber with a gentle smile. How wonderful, he murmured, to witness such a perfect example of what makes Hogwarts truly magical. The elf exhausted himself with his duties, explained Professor Wigglesworth. We thought it best to let him rest. A most compassionate decision, Dumbledore agreed, and it seems the library itself concurs. He gestured to the humming books and the self-consecting blanket. For several minutes the headmaster stood in contemplative silence, observing the scene with the same attentive curiosity he might give to a rare magical phenomenon. Then, with a small nod of satisfaction, he withdrew his wand and made a series of intricate gestures in the air around the sleeping elf. A simple charm to ensure he remains undisturbed until he has rested fully, Dumbledore explained to the curious portraits. And perhaps, he added with a twinkle in his eye, a small enchantment to ensure particularly pleasant dreams. Our hard-working friend deserves no less. With that, the headmaster bid the portraits good night and departed as quietly as he had arrived, leaving behind a sense of approval that seemed to settle over the library like a second blanket, intangible but unmistakably present. The night continued its slow progression toward dawn. The fire burned steadily, neither diminishing nor growing, maintaining its perfect warmth. The humming of the books gradually synchronized into a harmonious drone that resembled nothing so much as the collective breathing of hundreds of sleeping beings. In his sleep, Nobby smiled. His dreams were indeed pleasant. Visions of perfectly arranged bookshelves stretching endlessly in every direction, of grateful students finding exactly the volumes they needed, of ancient books restored to their original splendor through his careful ministrations. These were simple dreams, reflective of a life dedicated to service, but they brought him deep satisfaction. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky outside the high windows, Madame Pinsforth cleared her painted throat softly. I believe the morning approaches, she observed. Should we wake him? The library will be opening in a few hours. Keela Mugwort shook her head. The headmaster's charm will allow him to wake naturally once he has rested sufficiently. There is no need to disturb him prematurely. Besides, added Professor Wigglesworth, the library is perfectly tidy. Nobby completed most of his tasks before succumbing to fatigue. A brief respite will not disrupt the day's operations. As if confirming his assessment, the library continued its peaceful slumber alongside its caretaker. The books that had been humming gradually closed themselves and slid back into their proper positions on the shelves. The enchanted lanterns adjusted their glow incrementally, simulating the natural progression from night to early morning. Outside the windows, the indigo sky lightened to deep blue, then to the pale lavender of early dawn. Birds began to sing in the trees of the forbidden forest, their distant chorus providing a counterpoint to the gentle crackling of the hearth fire. The castle was beginning to stir, house elves in other sections already preparing breakfast, professors reviewing their lesson plans for the day ahead. Yet within the library, time seemed to move more gently. Nobby slept on, his small chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of deep, restorative rest. The blanket remained tucked securely around him, occasionally readjusting itself when he shifted position. The portraits maintained their quiet vigil, speaking only in the softest of whispers when necessary. It was nearly 2 hours after dawn when Nobby finally began to wake. First his long ears twitched, then his eyelids fluttered. He stretched slightly under the blanket, his consciousness gradually surfacing from the depths of sleep. When his large eyes finally opened, They widened in immediate alarm as he realized where he was and how much time had passed. "Oh," he squeaked, bolting upright. "Nobby has fallen asleep during his duties. Nobby must—" "Calm yourself, dear elf," interrupted Healer Mugwort in her most soothing tone. "All is well. The library is in perfect order, and you have more than earned your rest." Nobby blinked in confusion, looking down at the blanket that still covered his lower half. But where did this come from? And why didn't Novi wake up? The library will be opening soon, and Novi hasn't even checked the restricted section or prepared the study tables or... "The headmaster himself visited during the night," Professor Wigglesworth informed him. "He saw that you were sleeping and cast an enchantment to ensure your rest would not be disturbed prematurely." "Professor Dumbledore was here." Nobby's voice rose an octave in distress. "And he saw Nobby sleeping instead of working? Oh, Nobby is so ashamed." "Nonsense," said Madame Pinsforth firmly. "The headmaster was pleased to see the library caring for you as you have cared for it. He said as much himself." Nobby still looked uncertain, his long fingers worrying at the edge of the blanket. "But Nobby has never fallen asleep during work before. It is not proper for a house elf to rest when exhausted," interjected Healer Mugwort gently. "My dear Nobby, even the most dedicated healers at St. Mungo's would take a moment to sit when their legs grew weary. There is no shame in acknowledging the needs of one's physical form." As Nobby considered this wisdom, he became more aware of how different he felt after his unexpected sleep. The fatigue that had been weighing on him for days had lifted. His mind felt clearer, his spirits lighter. Even his magic seemed more responsive, humming contentedly beneath his skin. "Novi does feel much better," he admitted, carefully folding the blanket that had covered him. But where did this come from? The portraits exchanged glances, none of them quite sure how to explain the castle's autonomous act of kindness. Finally, Professor Wigglesworth said simply, "It seems Hogwarts thought you might be cold." Nobby considered this for a moment, his expression thoughtful. House elves understood, perhaps better than witches and wizards, that Hogwarts possessed a type of sentience, not a full consciousness like that of a living being, but an accumulated awareness born from centuries of magical habitation. The castle responded to needs, anticipated dangers, and occasionally, as it seemed, showed appreciation for those who tended to it. "Nobby is grateful," he said finally, addressing his words to the library itself as much as to the portraits. With careful reverence, he placed the folded blanket on a nearby shelf, where it would be easily accessible should anyone need it during the coming day. Rising to his feet, Nobby quickly assessed the state of the library. To his surprise, it was indeed nearly perfect, shelves ordered, tables cleared, even the floor looking freshly polished. Only the restricted section remained to be checked, a task that would take mere minutes now that he was refreshed and alert. "You see," said Madame Pinsforth with satisfaction, "no harm done, and now you can complete your final task before the students arrive, without the risk of falling asleep among those dreadful moaning manuscripts in the restricted section." Nobby nodded, straightening his tea-tail uniform with newly energized dignity. "Nobby will check the restricted section immediately, and tonight," he added with unexpected firmness, "Nobby will be sure to rest properly before his shift, so as not to disrespect the library with inappropriate napping." The portraits smiled at his earnestness, recognizing that the elf was neither promising to never rest again, nor admitting fault for his needed sleep. It was a subtle but significant shift, an acknowledgement that proper rest was, in its way, a form of respect for his duties, rather than a dereliction of them. With a final grateful bow to the portraits, Nobby made his way toward the restricted section, his usual brisk efficiency restored by his night of unexpected rest. As he moved between the towering shelves, the first rays of morning sunlight began to stream through the high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in golden beams across the ancient stone floor. The library was awakening to a new day, ready to fulfill its purpose as a repository of magical knowledge for yet another generation of witches and wizards. Books that had been silent during the night began their usual restless shifting, pages ruffling as if in anticipation of being opened. The enchanted lanterns extinguished themselves one by one, their light no longer needed as natural illumination filled the vast space. By the time Madame Pince, the current librarian, arrived to unlock the main doors, Nobby had completed his inspection of the restricted section and was nowhere to be seen, having slipped away through the hidden passages that house elves used to move unseen throughout the castle. No evidence remained of his nighttime rest by the hearth, save perhaps for the faded blanket now neatly arranged on a shelf near the fireplace, ready to offer its comfort to any student who might feel a chill during their studies. The portraits watched as Madame Pince conducted her own inspection of the library, nodding in approval at its immaculate condition. None of them mentioned the events of the night. Such things were between the castle and its caretakers, mysteries of Hogwarts that existed alongside the more formal magic taught in its classrooms. As the first students began to trickle in, their arms laden with books and parchment, the library resumed its daytime persona, a place of study and research, of whispered conversations and scratching quills. But something of the night's magic lingered in the air, a reminder that Hogwarts was more than just stone and mortar, more than just a school. It was a place where books might sing lullabies to a tired elf, where ancient blankets could remember their purpose of providing comfort, where portraits maintained centuries-long vigils over the spaces entrusted to their painted eyes. It was a place where magic existed not just in spectacular feats of transfiguration or charm work, but in the small, quiet moments of care that often went unnoticed, but were no less powerful for their subtlety. And deep in the kitchens, preparing lunch alongside his fellow elves, Nobby felt a new connection to the castle he had served for so many decades. He had always loved Hogwarts, had always been proud to contribute to its proper functioning, but now he understood something more profound, that his relationship with the castle was reciprocal, that his care for its spaces was matched by a kind of care in return. It was a comforting thought, one that brought a small smile to his face as he chopped vegetables for the day's soup. And if the kitchen fires seemed to burn a bit more evenly for him, if the knives stayed sharper a bit longer in his hands, if the ingredients seemed to arrange themselves more conveniently within his reach, well, that was simply Hogwarts being Hogwarts, wasn't it? Magic, after all, worked in mysterious ways, especially in a place where so many different kinds of magic had coexisted for so long. That night, as Nobby prepared for his library duties, he did something he had never done before. He took a short nap in his small quarters, allowing himself 30 minutes of rest before beginning his shift. It felt strange, almost rebellious, but he reminded himself that even Professor Dumbledore had approved of his rest the previous night. When he arrived at the library, refreshed and alert, the portraits nodded approvingly, though none commented directly on his improved state. Words weren't necessary. The library itself seemed to welcome him with a particular warmth, the fire in the hearth burning with a cheerful glow, the books settling more readily into their proper places as he worked. And so a new pattern was established, not just for Nobby, but perhaps for Hogwarts itself. A pattern that acknowledged the symbiotic relationship between the castle and those who cared for it. a recognition that rest was not the enemy of diligence, but its necessary companion. As winter deepened outside the castle walls, as snow piled in drifts against the ancient stone and ice formed delicate patterns on the window panes, the library remained a haven of warmth and knowledge. And each night, as Nobby completed his rounds, the portraits watched over him with quiet affection, guardians of a space where magic manifested not just in spells and potions, but in the simple, profound act of caring for one another. The fireplace continued to burn with its enchanted flame, providing warmth without smoke, light without danger to the precious books that lined the shelves. And, on the coldest nights, when the wind howled around the towers and even the thickest walls couldn't keep out the bitter chill entirely, the faded blanket would sometimes be found near the hearth, as if waiting. Nobby never again allowed himself to fall asleep during his duties, but sometimes, when his work was complete and the night was particularly peaceful, he would permit himself a few minutes of rest before the fire, a brief moment of communion with the heart of the library. He would never have admitted it to anyone, but these quiet interludes became the favorite part of his day, a time when he could feel the gentle pulse of Hogwarts' ancient magic all around him, could sense the accumulated wisdom of centuries preserved in the books under his care, and if, occasionally, he thought he heard the faintest hint of a lullaby emanating from the shelves, or noticed the blanket inching closer of its own accord, well, that was between him and the library, wasn't it? One of the countless small magics that made Hogwarts not just a school of witchcraft and wizardry, but a home to all who dwelled within its walls, from the mightiest wizard to the smallest house elf. For magic, true magic, existed not just in the grand gestures and powerful spells that filled the pages of the books Nobby so carefully tended, but in the quiet moments of connection that wove themselves through the fabric of everyday life at Hogwarts. Moments like a tired elf being tucked in by an enchanted blanket, while portraits kept watch, and books sang soft lullabies in the gentle glow of a magical fire. In such moments, the boundaries between the various inhabitants of the castle, human and elf, painting and book, stone and spell, seemed to dissolve, revealing the deeper truth that they were all, in their different ways, part of the same magical ecosystem, each contributing to and drawing from the ancient power that had made Hogwarts a beacon of magical learning for 1,000 years. And so the rhythm of life continued in the library and throughout the castle, days filled with lessons and laughter, nights with quiet study and careful maintenance. Seasons changed, students graduated, new first years arrived wide-eyed at the foot of the grand staircase. Professors came and went, headmasters rose and fell. The wizarding world outside the castle walls faced its own cycles of peace and turmoil. Through it all, Nobby continued his nightly rounds, a small but essential thread in the vast tapestry of Hogwarts life. His ears grew a bit greyer, his steps perhaps a bit slower, but his dedication never wavered, and each night, as he tended the library hearth, he carried with him the knowledge that he was not merely a servant of the castle, but a part of it, as valued and necessary in his way as the ancient stones themselves. The portraits, eternal in their frames, watched over him with the patient affection of those who measure time not in days or years, but in decades and centuries. They had seen countless librarians come and go, had witnessed the evolution of countless students from nervous first years to confident graduates, but few had left as lasting an impression on the library as the small, diligent elf who treated each book as a treasure, and who understood, in his humble way, the true magic that made Hogwarts more than just a school. And on quiet nights, when the wind whispered around the towers and stars shone bright in the enchanted ceiling of the great hall, that magic could be felt most strongly. In the gentle hum of books settling into their shelves, in the soft crackle of hearth fires burning without smoke, in the barely perceptible sigh of ancient stones adjusting to accommodate those who dwelled within them. It was not the flashy magic of duels and transfigurations, not the kind that appeared in Daily Prophet headlines or Ministry of Magic decrees. It was older, deeper, more fundamental, the magic of home and hearth, of care freely given and gratefully received, of belonging to something greater than oneself. It was, perhaps, the truest magic of all, and nowhere was it more perfectly embodied than in the sight of a small house elf, having completed his duties with unfailing care, allowing himself a moment of well-earned rest before a library fire that seemed to burn just a little brighter, a little warmer, as if in recognition of a job well done. Our magical journey through Hogwarts comes to a close for tonight. Now you'll hear the gentle crackling of the common room fire and soothing ambient sounds of the castle to accompany you as you drift off to sleep. These calming sounds will continue without any advertisements or interruptions. May your dreams be filled with magic and wonder, and may you sleep as peacefully as if you were tucked away in your cozy four-poster bed in the dormitory. Good night, dear witch or wizard, until our next adventure in the wizarding world.